Hello, I'm Jeff Hayes, CEO of Sound Booth Theater and narrator of Pilgrims by M.R. Leonard, and this is part 2 of the YouTube edition of the Pilgrims audiobook. If you want to get right to the audiobook, you can skip to 30 minutes on this video. We will be releasing 2 more parts to this audiobook weekly, and each one will have a little bonus interview just like this one with different guests. If you just want to listen to the whole thing without having to wait another week for an installment, or if you just want to support Sound Booth Theater, M.R. Leonard, or this channel, check the description below to find a discount code to purchase it on Sound Booth. Today, Michael Leonard and I are here to chat with Christopher Ruocchio, the acclaimed author of the Sun Eater series. We'll be discussing the role of religion in science fiction and fantasy, and how Pilgrims and the Sun Eater series approach it.
Okay, so we are here with M.R. Leonard, author of Pilgrims, the author of the second part of the audiobook you're about to listen to now, and also the author of the Sun Eater series. Christopher Ruocchio is here to talk about sci-fi in general and to talk about Pilgrims a little bit with us. So thank you so much for coming and hanging out with us. Could you give us a little bit of a more introduction to who you are as an author and what you do?
Totally. Thanks for having me, guys. So I'm Christopher Ruocchio. I'm the author of the Sun Eater science fantasy series, I like to say, just so that people who are expecting a physics manual know they're not getting one. It's 7 books now. The last one, Shadows Upon Time, is out in November. First one came out in 2018, and I have been writing professionally ever since. I also, for 7 years, was junior editor at Bain Books. I worked with writers like David Weber and Larry Correia and Los Bujold. So I was mostly doing marketing, and I did some short story work, short story collection work mostly while I was there. But I've been on either side of the editorial desk, but I've been writing solely since, I think, 2022.
I'm thrilled you're here because in addition to being an author of this series that some are likening to an epic on the scale of Dune, uh, maybe myself, but also others have said that. You have a pretty good bird's eye view of science fiction, both its history and its current state of affairs, from your editorial work, but also because you're an author in the space. So I'd really like to get uh, your kind of impressions about where we are in 2025 today. What are the big trends that we're experiencing, and where's it going? Like, I feel like there's been different eras, and it might be possible that we're entering into a new one. So I'm just kind of curious what your sense of the state of things is.
My personal sense is not so much that we're entering a new era as that, in a weird way, history has ended, because the field really is everywhere now, right? There are just so many books, not just because indie is now a thing, right? And there are more than 1 million books published a year, period, right? Which is an explosion of productivity for literature, right? To a degree that we've never seen before. But even just within traditional publishing, there are more publishers now, there are more imprints now, there are more writers now than at any prior point, right? I'm friends with a gentleman, his name's Ben, who had been on the Hugo Award Commission for decades. He'd been going to Worldcon since the 70s. And he actually had the record for most consecutive Worldcon attendances in history, right? He beat Robert Silverberg at some point in the last couple of years, and so Ben would talk about a time when it was possible to read everything, right? Where everybody was reading everything, right? And so when you were picking the Hugo Award for Best Novel, right, you could have a certain confidence that you were really selecting the best book of the year because there were a few dozen, maybe 100 books published. And if you were a voracious reader, you could get through all of that, no problem. And bear in mind too, the books were shorter, and that's gone, right? There's very clearly. I like to say it's clearly the Tower of Babel fell a little while ago in science fiction, right? Because nobody can even agree outside of maybe the Brandon Sandersons of the world what the sort of contemporary canon of must-read books is. You can find sort of whatever you want in science fiction, even without recourse to the very specific micro genres that indie is able to produce. So precisely, even just in traditional publishing, there's so many things happening. It's easier for me to talk honestly about what's going on in fantasy, right? There's been this move towards sort of the romance angle in fantasy. Science fiction has been doing a lot of social commentary stuff and has been getting for the most part, I think, away from hard science, but then there's still a strong hard science vein in traditional publishing. If you are a reader of a very specific thing, you can find what you're looking for in almost limitless supply, no matter what it is. And that is both a blessing, I think, for readers and a curse for writers, because you have to figure out how to get attention and stand out. And that really is an idiosyncratic process, I think, for each and every one of us. What a career and what an audience build looks like.
So science fiction as a coherent category, is it blending away? Is it just kind of diluting out? Like, for example, in the 60s, when you articulated an AI, maybe that was kind of striking and imaginative. But as we go deeper into the 21st century, is this sort of kind of writing not really going to make as much of an impact? Is it not going to be distinct from the rest of what's going on? Or there's still a type of story that science fiction tells that's distinct from maybe other genres that are going to keep going forward?
Yeah, this is that Tower of Babel thing, right? I think as any art form matures, right, it doesn't have to be literature. It can be film. It can be paintings, right? The way we talk about it, the language we use to describe stories or paintings, whatever, right, kind of ossifies, right? People have this sort of vocabulary for how they talk about books, right? All these very specific terms for subgenres, these sort of tropes that readers are aware of, and in a certain sense, I think this. Allows for sort of more improvisation, because people are like, I want to take this specific thing and I want to do this to it, right? And that sort of takes the genre, the art form, out into these little sort of spiral fractal spaces where new things that might not have happened otherwise happen. The language with which people think about fantasy, science fiction, hadn't really been developed 100 years ago, right? And so there was a lot more latitude for sort of randomness and freedom. I was talking about my favorite Conan stories, Tower of the Elephant, and not to ruin it for Jeff, but there's an alien in it, right? Like, why is there an alien in the Conan story, right? It's like, that's very surprising. And there wasn't a sense that that was weird, because everything was weird. It was weird that you were writing a fantasy story at all, right? It came out in weird tales, and there was this idea of fantasy and science fiction as weird fiction in the first place, right? It was just, we don't really know what to do with this, right? We're over here, we're publishing adventure stories about pirates. I don't know what those guys are up to, right? And so we lose, I think, some of that sort of Wild West narrative chaos, because everything has gotten a little box to describe it. It's like when I talk about my books, the furthest I want to go is also say science fantasy. I could say, it's like a space opera with like notes of Gothic literature and sort of a cyberpunk demi-glaze over the top. But like, to a lot of people, I think that turns them off wanting to eat. Now, for like, very intense readers, right? Then they know that's exactly the restaurant they want to go to. But for someone who doesn't know what any of that means, it's just like, I'm not qualified to read this story. And as much as I want to reach diehard science fiction fans, I kind of feel like I will anyway, at this point, especially at this point. But it's like the people who are like not sure about it that I want to feel like they can, come in.
Science fantasy. So I think that is a apt description of your book, that if you're a sci-fi fan, you will not be turned off. It's not like you feel like it was false advertising, but there's definitely a fantastical element that describes your work a lot better. So can you double click on science fantasy, and like, why do you explain why you use that descriptor, but like, what does that mean in practice? Like, what's the shoe leather understanding of how a reader should go into your work with that heading or other headings that describe other works?
The reason for using the term, frankly, is cynical, right? Fantasy is a much larger market than science fiction is. But I think the crossover largely is because science fiction has a reputation, or crossover fails to happen largely because science fiction has a reputation for being hard. And there were a lot of people who were like, I haven't read a science manual. I have no idea how quantum mechanics works. I don't think anybody does, so I think that's fine. And so I wanted to call it science fantasy, so the fantasy readers might be tempted to try it, right? This is sort of an entry point to science fiction for hopefully some people. And it seems to actually have borne out, which is nice. But by saying that, I want people to know that the science isn't like the point of the story. It is an element of the story. It is part of the world. It is part of the setting, but it isn't like reading an Asimov story where the idea is the thing, right? Like, that's what drives the story, is this hook about how, I don't know, inertial dampeners might work, right? Or, the effects of relativistic travel on, blah, blah, blah. Although there is some of that, but the story is still People will say, I'm a character first reader, or, I really am interested in plot or something. But stories are about characters, period. I think that conversation is sort of missing the point. Stories about human beings. And so I wanted to make sure that people had this understanding that the characters were centered in the storytelling in a way that would hopefully make the books more accessible, at least conceptually, to people who are afraid of science fiction. The story has science in it, sure, right? But it is about the people and the world and the politics, and the science drives all of that, right? Because it's very, very rarely the case, actually, that technology does anything other than facilitate everything else in our lives, right? Like, our lives are shaped by social media, right? Communications technology, air conditioning, refrigeration, whatever, right? But those things really just, they change the shape of our lives. Our experience of our lives isn't that we are ruled by these things, right? It's a little bit more distant, even though they do rule us, in many ways. But it feels like, we're still the main character, each of us, I think, in our own lives. And so having a vision of the world and of history in the books that is not completely dominated by the science, but in which science plays a part in society, is sort of important for me. If there is a way in which my books are connected to whatever sort of mainstream science fiction is doing right now, it is sort of coming out of this sort of more humanistic angle, this which had been sort of a thing from the 90s. It's kind of continued into now. There are ways in which I think I cut across the grain, but in that way, I think I'm sort of more in step with what's going on. I'm more interested in that, and in questions. If there are questions of science, I'm more interested in things like sociology and psychology and biology than I am in physics and engineering questions. I'm just not that guy.
But what you do, which is great, is that you really remind us how big space is. So, I mean, the characters are characters, but they have to confront the fact that even with faster than light travel, unless it's like insta travel, you still have to spend a long time on a ship to get anywhere of significance in the galaxy. So, like that's kind of hard sci-fi right there. But it's
Sure,
also just an interesting challenge for your characters to have to confront and deal with. And so that's the human element that goes with it. But
Yeah.
you mentioned something about the humanistic sort of change that's going on right now, and how your series is departing from that, because I feel like mine definitely departed from that. What's going on there? What's happening with metaphysics and this genre science fiction that typically just ignored it or wrote it out of the whole world, uh, scorned it more or
with the
less?
humanistic thing I was talking about, there is this vein of science fiction writers that start sort of in the 90s. Kim Stanley Robinson is sort of one of them, whose focus is on sort of the human experience of technological change, right? And this sort of thread runs forward to now, right? A lot of those guys are still working. And this is sort of like, this is one of the reactions to cyberpunk in the 80s, right? There are sort of other threads that branch out of that. Sort of the new space opera is one of them as well. And like I said, now we've sort of arrived at a point where if you're writing science fiction, what you're doing is you're looking at a tradition of earlier writers and you're saying, which camp do I want to be in, instead of sort of forging a new camp. See, it's sort of my feeling, right? It's like I'm writing like these people, or I'm writing in response to counter these people, right? And that's part of the great conversation. That's all cool, right? As far as the metaphysics goes, I think what you're talking about, right, and this is relevant to both your book and mine, is sort of the religion angle. And science fiction has been, if not hostile to religion, happy to ignore it, which has sort of always baffled me. I have a panel I propose to science fiction conventions when I go, called "There's No Chaplain on the Enterprise," right? Because there is virtually no religion, certainly no human religion in Star Trek. It shows up in very marginal ways, intermittently. But like every naval vessel has a chaplain now, and the rejoinder I always get from people at conventions is, "Oh, but they have a psychologist," and I get very aggressive with these people and say that's not the same thing. Religious forces are probably primary, right, or nearly primary in human cultures historically. Period. Right, like it's they're up there with like love and marriage and reproduction. Right, like the religious question is probably the number two question for most people. Right, if it's not the number one question. And for science fiction to ignore it because the people who are writing science fiction don't have any interest in that question, just out of their personal for personal biographical reasons. They just don't care about religion. A lot of the great science fiction writers have been atheists or agnostics, right? Is, I think, to miss human nature completely. And I think that if science fiction writers historically have engaged with this question at all, it's been cynically. Look, I love Dune, but like Frank Herbert clearly believes it's all nonsense, right? Dune is largely interested in religion as a sort of social lever and manipulator, which most people who are religious don't think about it that way. They think about it sincerely, right? They may be wrong. Maybe you and I are both wrong, Michael. I don't think we are, but maybe, right? And but even if we are, we're not thinking about it for its social utility reasons, right? We're thinking about it sincerely, and this is something science fiction has just missed pretty much the whole time. There are exceptions, right? I'm a big Ken for Leibowitz fan, right? But it's there. The exceptions are so few that I can like name them, right?
I agree with you. I think it's been this huge glaring hole in the world building of science fiction, but there's been some great stories that have come out of the last 70 years. Like, fair enough. Like Star Trek, there's a lot to be said about it. It's just in the year 2025, this is my rant right now. I just think readers and audiences are kind of like, okay, we did that. Can you like stop taking off this kind of ignore this giant part of human nature hat and, try to tell a more enriching and fulfilling story? I come at it from my perspective, but I think the genre or writing or literature would be better off if more authors kind of took this on seriously and tried to deal with it.
Yeah, actually, that I've noticed that myself. I would say I'm agnostic, although I'm positive that I have a lot more respect for religion than most atheists or agnostics. I recognize how much of the sci-fi community and how much of, frankly, a lot of fiction writers nowadays are atheist, agnostic, and how much disdain there is for religion, I think, in that world right now. Do you guys feel kind of isolated from a lot of sci-fi authors because of this?
I find conventions sometimes, like I said, the Star Trek panel is always very hostile, right? Because what I'm actually doing when I'm critiquing Star Trek in this very fundamental world building way, is attacking sort of something that is as important to a lot of the people in the audience as religion, right? I have this sense, that there's a lot in common between science fiction conventions and religious festivals, right? People wear costumes, right? They do rituals, right? They, show up, they like make a pilgrimage to this place, right? To do all these things, and they come home with icons and,
Mm-hmm.
idols and trinkets and stuff. And I'm not, like I've got little statues and action figures and posters and things too, right? Like, that stuff's all cool. I'm not denigrating, I love science fiction, but for a lot of people, I think it fills that space. And so when you say Star Trek is broken, right, in this like fundamental way, people take that very personally. And I'm maybe not as nice about it as I could be. There's a lot of sort of interesting fertile ground in science fiction that could be covered if we talk about this stuff, right? And if we take it seriously. And I'm not asking that every writer does, but I always say, like, I love Stargate, right? But it would have been, I think, far more interesting and nuanced to show if one of the members of SG1 was believed in anything, right? There's some indication in the story that Carter maybe is some sort of Protestant Christian, but like, you have a universe where these old Earth gods are actually aliens. That raises a lot of questions, world building questions.
It sure does. It sure does.
They could have spent some time on it. Again, I love Stargate, but if they had had this extra dimension to it, man, like, maybe those questions aren't interesting to everybody, but they sure are interesting to me. Um, and there's a lot of, if you for example, if you read about ufology, right, a lot of those guys think that aliens and demons are the same thing, but like, which direction, right, is that the case? Are aliens demons, or are demons aliens, right? And there's a lot of science fiction territory that could be covered with that, in either direction. That's really, really interesting. And we've mostly had demons are aliens, right? But the other way around is just as interesting, and maybe more interesting. That's where you get into like sort of almost this like occult science fiction stuff that you run into sometimes, which is very fun. And it's also one of the things that attracts me to like Japanese science fiction too, video games and things. Star Ocean, will sort of play with this stuff in a way that a lot of Western writers won't, because the Japanese creators aren't as sensitive to the cultural context in the same way that. And so they'll sort of trample through and just tell these stories, right? How many Final Fantasy games end with you killing God, right? Like, it's 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 interesting, even when I'm like, that I don't know, Elden Ring. That's not quite, you're using some of those symbols in a weird way that I don't understand. But that can be really interesting. But it is uncomfortable. It is uncomfortable sometimes being in being in the genre, right? Because you just talk to people and they'll say things that are very aggressive. They're just like, oh, these dumb Christians, whatever, blah blah blah. I'm like, I'm actually, we're in the room right now, buddy. I'm right here.
Is it bad, Christopher, that I kind of love that so much? Like, I get kind of a cold thrill out of being the Maverick, or have I just not taken enough lumps yet?
I don't know if that's. I don't know that that's bad. You just. I think you run a little cooler than me. I get very stressed out. Yeah. I don't like conflict, despite the fact that I start a lot of it by, um, saying Star Trek has issues.
It may be reactionary to that atmosphere that's created, though, right?
Yeah.
It's as if you're immediately constrained as soon as you get there, and so the urge to just kind of like say something about it maybe creates that aggression.
Yeah, it's like ripping off a Band-Aid, right? It's often the case in these sort of cultural debates that when you see something, right? Like, how many times do you see people like criticizing Star Wars who are not responding to anything in the original post, right? They're just like,
Mm-hmm.
"Oh, I see a Star Wars, right? This thing is bad." And it's like, this was like it was just a picture of an old, Ralph McQuarrie concept art. Why are you freaking out?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's okay. It's all right. Calm down, right? But they're responding to what's in the air, right? And not
Yeah.
it's hard for, I think, all of us, right? So I do feel sort of like I'm walking on eggshells the whole time, and that does make one a little bit stressed. I have to be extra careful, with how I sort of present ideas. But I do have a lot of ideas that are sort of contrary to where things are. One of the big things, and this isn't a science fiction thing at all, is I hate magic systems. The idea of the magic system in the first place, I think, is very limiting.
This is your chief heresy, I think, in your field. I've heard you talk about this. This is probably the biggest heresy.
Yeah, sure. I won't get into it, but I don't like them, right? And so, but if you do that, people are like, "Wait a minute, you're saying you don't like fantasy, right?" Because that thing has become fantasy for so many people.
Yeah.
What are you saying? You don't like Mistborn? I'm like, I have never read it, right? I just don't like the idea of working magic this way, right? It's very, very contra, and then people are very protective of their sacred cows, right? And and they should be, like, it's important to them, right? But the field, I think, is big enough for both of these ideas, right? Especially now. So it's not like I'm going to stop hard magic systems from existing. I'm just going to hopefully provide something that's not that.
Oh, I was going to ask you, Jeff, about lit RPG. I mean, that's a kind of a newer genre. Is it blue sky wherever you go? You can kind of do whatever you want. Would religion, if it's incorporated, be considered heretical and don't go there? Like, what you have your finger on the pulse of the lit RPG kind of subgenre, I think.
If we're talking strictly mechanically, then yes, it's very open. Like you could fit to the extent that you can imagine a way to inspire people with religion in a video game. I think it's a doable thing. But in the context of the audience, I think that's a hard sell. I think that's a really hard sell. I think that the hard magic aspect of fantasy is kind of blown up with lit RPG because you literally have video game mechanics to explain all of it. You literally have numbers to work with, and that's one of the things that lit RPG audiences are looking for. They are mired in the particulars. They want to keep track and they want to live vicariously through your character. And so a problem with religion in that regard is that religion tends to humble people and make them think outside of themselves and think of something bigger than themselves. Lit RPG, I think, is very, very focused on the self and very focused on the decisions that the character makes as the most important things in the genre. Now, you can, if you're a really clever writer, I think that you can trick them into thinking bigger and into seeing the bigger picture. But I don't see it happening often or at all. Well, I don't know. I would say Dungeon Crawler Carl does kind of reach out and and do that, but it's in a way where it puts the main character in this box, in this stressful situation where he has to beat the much bigger thing that's happening in order to get out of just his own situation. So I think it would be tough. It would be a challenge for sure. But if you're an author that digs a challenge, hey, why not?
What's nice about Carl, though, I feel like if his character encountered a genuinely religious person in the DCC world, he wouldn't be scornful.
Not at all. No, I think Carl is definitely the kind of person who wants to accept people and wants to figure out what your strengths are in any situation, any kind of person. Like he's pretty welcoming as long as you're not a dick.
I think you could make a lit RPG system that worked off of religion for sure, right? Like it just might. The one that comes to mind is sort of Greco-Roman paganism, though, right? Yeah. It's like, how many goat sacrifices do I need to level up? Exactly, right?
Right,
right. I'll meet class up with Zeus here. I think it could be done, and in a way that actually is even true to the sort of source culture, right?
So, there's a video game called Black and White. Have you heard of it?
No.
It's basically a god sim. Like you start with their village and you're a god, and like you make miracles happen, and you ask them to sacrifice things, and their village gets bigger or gets smaller depending on your own actions and how you motivate them and everything like that. So perhaps you could.
There's ways to make it work,
Yeah.
You could see how that wouldn't really work with the Christian worldview, though, because it's hard to
probably not.
My mana is increasing for this exorcist so he can, get rid of the demon. Like, the minute you put numbers on it, it's kind of, I don't know.
It breaks down for sure.
Yeah. Hey, maybe that could be the moral of the story at the end of the day, though, is like all these numbers are nonsense, right? Like as a god, you need to be paying more attention to, the will of the people or how they're feeling or what your actions are doing to them or anything like that. Real quick, I had one question that popped up, Michael, when you were talking about Pilgrims and the conceit of the aliens coming to talk to the Pope and not the leader of the people. And it struck me that what make the big difference there from an outside perspective is the humility of the aliens. They're not coming to negotiate something, or they're not coming to conquer. They're coming because they believe that the Pope is someone to bow down to. And I think that's something that we don't see often at all in other alien races and other sci-fis, is like usually either the aliens are warlike and they're coming to destroy Earth, or there's some other territory that the humans are fighting them over, or they're just backwards and to be conquered. And so I think that really lends a different tone to Pilgrims. Is that something that you considered as you were writing it?
Yeah, in the book, it's really, I definitely played with that trope because if you think of the day the Earth stood still, the aliens land and the robots there to tell them what's up. Like it's not about the humans really having it at a place of power. Their job is to get in line and follow these kind of galactic norms and stop being children, essentially. And I like the idea that the most important person in the galaxy, as far as my aliens are concerned, is the Pope, someone who lives in Rome like now. A lot of people don't know what's more alien, the aliens or the Catholicism. And that's like my favorite sort of feedback, because I like being able to tell a story that gets people to look at something within their own world in a new way. Because if you take seriously what the Christian claims are, that Jesus is God and he rose from the dead and he was incarnate here on earth, and then you take that another step forward and think his successor of his church is a guy named the Pope who's in Rome. That's like epic alien world building science fiction fantasy stuff on the next level. If I could just kind of hold up a mirror and get people to see kind of the uniqueness and wildness of their own lived experience, this reality that we currently inhabit, then that's great. That's just a joyful thing to be able to do as an author. And now the Pope is American, so he reads English, so he could, and he's an Augustinian. So I don't know, maybe someone can get Pilgrims into his hands. And I'd love to hear his feedback on the story.
It's your next YouTube video.
All right. Thank you, Christopher. And thank you again, Michael, for another awesome intro to Pilgrims. And to you watchers and listeners out there, enjoy.
Sound Booth Theater presents Pilgrims, written by M.R. Leonard, featuring Annie Ellicott as Secretary Ramirez, Lieutenant Wu, and Claire, Gary Francis Furlong as Father Ambrose, and Justin Thomas James as Virgil. Narrated by Jeff Hayes. Part 2, Chapter 10.
Help me! Someone!
A man nearby said, his voice high like a child's, even though his gray hair betrayed him.
I'm not supposed to be here.
Austin wasn't supposed to be here either. He was supposed to be dead, killed in a world-ending fireball. Instead, he was in a waking nightmare, kneeling on the floor of a disused warehouse, with his arms bound behind his back, a solitary light overhead to illuminate him, and the 20 other similarly restrained wretches kneeling all around him. The light was an island of brightness in the vast emptiness of the warehouse, the rest of the cavernous space drenched in impenetrable shadow. In those shadows lurked the black shirts, the only warning of their approach the clomp of their boots.
I was just trying to get some noodles,
the man blubbered.
He was dead when I got there. I tried to tell them.
Austin shifted his knees, but they cried out in pain at the slightest movement. There was no comfortable position on the cold and dirty floor.
I was hungry. That's the only reason I was at the restaurant.
A fresh round of tears streamed down the man's face.
I don't even know who he was.
Shut up, a long-haired prisoner kneeling behind the crying man whispered. You'll bring on the black shirts. The man continued to sob.
Why won't they listen? I told them it wasn't me.
Shut up.
I'm a good man. I've never hurt anyone.
Shut up. The long-haired prisoner's voice strained above a whisper, a reeking desperation in his tone.
I'm not supposed to be here.
Hey. The prisoner to the right of the crying man was whispering now. He looked different from the others. While everyone else wore crumpled street clothes, he wore a well-pressed suit. The black shirts like to torture criers, the well-dressed man said into the crying man's ear. Especially ones who say they're innocent. They take it as an insult, like you think they don't know how to do their job. The crying man fell silent, his face turning an ashen white. Austin felt his skin crawl as images of torture filled his mind. He wanted to run, sprint into the darkness, anything to get out of this place. The clomp of boots filled the air, and 5 figures appeared at the boundary of the darkness. The center figure stepped into the light, revealing himself as a black shirt with a set of sergeant's stripes on his left arm. Process them, he said. 4 more emerged from the darkness and descended upon the prisoners, rousing them to their feet. They formed the prisoners into a line, kneeling them side by side. Austin was placed at the leftmost extreme of the line. At the other extreme was the crying man. Mr. Hung Nguyen, the sergeant said as he and 2 other black shirts moved behind the crying man. You are found guilty of violating the Manpower Readiness Act by means of murdering a Mr. Kwong No.
It wasn't me!
Quiet! The butt of a rifle came crashing down on Mr. Nguyen's head, and he collapsed in a pile on the ground. Pursuant to wartime protocols, you will face summary execution. The 2 black shirts propped Mr. Nguyen back up onto his knees. Despite the blow, he was still conscious, his eyes glassy as one of the black shirts put a black hood over his head. Without any ceremony, a shot rang out, the burst echoing off the unseen warehouse walls. Mr. Nguyen fell to the ground, blood leaking from the new hole in the hood.
A dizziness overcame Austin, as if reality itself were slipping from his grasp. It had been so quick, so unremarkable. No time to process the impending darkness before the bullet did its job. The sergeant moved to the next person in line.
Mr. Trent Samuels, you are found guilty of violating the Manpower Readiness Act by means of murdering Miss Olivia Hernandez.
I called it off,
Mr. Samuels protested.
I told the guy not to kill that cheating whore.
Pursuant to wartime protocols,
The sergeant continued as though the man hadn't spoken.
You will face summary execution.
Another black shirt shoved a hood over Mr. Samuel's head. Austin saw the flash, and a ringing filled his ears. This was it. The comeuppance that only a few hours ago he was sure he'd never have to face.
Mr. Albert Lawson, you are found guilty of...
Before the sergeant could finish, the well-dressed prisoner leapt to his feet from a spot in the center of the line and made a break for the darkness.
Stop him!
The sergeant yelled. The black shirts leveled their rifles, but before they could get off a round, the man was lost in the murk. The black shirts held their fire, seemingly unwilling to shoot without their target in sight. The idea spread among the condemned men like a wildfire. Mr. Lawson was the first to try and follow the well-dressed man's lead, but his knees failed him as he tried to stand, and he fell face first onto the concrete floor, a hail of lead from the now alert black shirts there to greet him. His death was not enough to stop the rest of the line, however, and the men scattered like a flock of pigeons chased by a dog. Austin shut his eyes as the fleeing bodies fell around him, the ring of the rifle bursts assaulting his ears. By instinct, he made himself small, falling forward onto the ground rather than trying to make a break for it. He lay there till silence overcame the room and only opened his eyes when a black shirt hoisted him back up onto his knees. The floor was covered in bodies, blood trickling toward Austin and pooling against his knees.
Mr. Kelly,
the sergeant said, standing behind the only other prisoner who hadn't made a break for it.
You are found guilty of violating the Manpower Readiness Act by means of murdering Mr. Marshall Reynolds.
Not wanting to see any more bloodshed, Austin kept his gaze forward into the darkness. He frowned slightly as he saw new figures standing there, their silhouettes motionless right at the boundary of the light.
Pursuant to wartime protocols, you will face summary execution.
The single shot rang out, well-mannered and orderly compared to the barrage moments before. Its effect was just as reliable, though, and the prisoner flopped forward, the black hood still over his head. This was it. Austin's turn. Fear gripped him like a vice as the black shirt moved behind him. He held his breath, awaiting the sentencing. His last opportunity to learn the name of the kind old man whose death had led him to this place.
Mr. Austin DeSantis, you are found guilty of violating the Manpower Readiness Act by means of murdering...
Stop,
a voice said from the darkness. Austin exhaled the breath he'd been holding, feeling a mixture of relief and lingering dread. With a frown, he realized he still didn't know the kind old man's name. An officer emerged into the light, looking a man apart in his olive-green uniform and balaclava-free face. He marched forward and held up a computer tablet in front of Austin.
Translate,
he ordered. On the screen was a paused video of a woman standing at a podium with the White House seal emblazoned on the front.
Translate.
Austin's voice was as worn as a stripped screw.
Into Latin.
The officer hit play.
The President has issued a statement concerning the reports of an alien superweapon coming out of China.
Not understanding what was happening, Austin looked on dumbly.
Let's go!
The officer snapped.
Simultaneous!
Base instinct took over, and Austin's mind fumbled to find the Latin.
Princeps publicae.
Austin struggled to conjure the words, the Latin knowledge he'd spent so many years cultivating buried underneath a thick layer of fear.
Faster!
The officer barked.
De fama tele terribilisme alieni genarum locutus est.
Austin spat.
Quod esenorum regno profectum es dicitur.
U.S. intelligence has detected no signals that indicate the alien mothership orbiting Earth contains a planet-killing device.
He was messing up his declensions, confusing his vocab, but he had no choice but to speed on.
Speculatores civitatum fuederitarum nulla signa repererunt navis aeriae aliani genarum principales orbem terrum. Cercum volantes quae machinam continet ruinam planetae nostrae minitantem.
The President has reached out to the Chinese General Secretary and implored him to stand down his nation's orbital nuclear launch platforms and return them to normal readiness, as failure to do so could compromise the premise and launch humanity into an unwanted war.
A scream broke Austin's concentration. The well-dressed man was hurled back into the light by two blackshirts, a foot-long gash carved across his belly, intestines protruding out. Austin's mind went blank as he watched blood sputter from the well-dressed man's mouth. By the time he looked back at the tablet, Austin could see the officer's eyes narrow.
Princeps ducem sinarum,
Austin strained, forcing himself to focus.
obsicravit ut omne suggestus telis nuclearibus orbitantibus emittendis accommodatus pro tempore exarmet et in solita promptitudine retineat. Quod nisi faciat periculum sit ne foedere fracto omne genus humanum in vitum bellum capesat.
The video ended, and the officer peered toward the tall silhouette that had been looming in the darkness throughout the examination. A coldness welled up from deep inside Austin as he agonized over his translation. He knew he'd flubbed orbital nuclear launch platforms, and that his syntax was second-rate, but all that disappeared in an instant. Out from the shadow stepped General Ferguson, his coarse face unmistakable. Austin scanned the general's expression, searching for even the slightest hint of satisfaction. But before he could discern anything, darkness overtook him. The blackshirts had slammed a hood over his head. The rough face of the general, the last thing he would ever see. Chapter 11. The harsh glare of fluorescent light flooded Austin's eyes. He'd been under the hood for hours, his captors giving him no explanation as they moved him about. With each passing second, he was sure a bullet would splatter his brains all over the inside of his veil. But he was still alive, and as his vision came into focus, he realized he was sitting in a classroom, facing a chalkboard, a large crucifix attached to the wall. His arms were bound behind his back. The blackshirts, who had duct-taped his ankles to the chair, stood at his side as he tried to get his bearings. To his right was a door that presumably led out to a hallway. To his left, on the opposite wall, were windows where weak daylight pushed against the closed blinds. The classroom was empty, save for the solitary chair he'd been taped to and a small wooden teacher's desk at the front. On the desk was a crest that read, St. John's College High School. He realized exactly where he was. Washington, D.C. His last visit had been a year before the Great Panic. The St. John's principal had tried to recruit Austin to come teach Latin full-time, offering a sign-on bonus and counting his years in grad school toward seniority, making tenure only 6 months of work away. Austin had said no. He'd thought it was beneath him to teach high school. Nothing less than a professorship would do. He came crawling back when the Great Panic kicked off, only to find the position already filled. He spent the next 5 years scraping by, doing odd jobs here and there to keep himself from total destitution, not a day going by where he didn't wonder what his life would have been like if he'd said yes. General Ferguson entered the room, and the blackshirts snapped to attention. With the amount of time the general spent on the news, his face was as familiar as Austin's own reflection, though much more imposing without a screen between them.
Dismissed,
the general ordered, and the blackshirts hurriedly exited. As General Ferguson pulled a knife from the sheath on his belt, the hairs on Austin's neck stood up. He watched warily as the general made his way closer, the knife held aloft in his hand. Austin braced himself, sure he was about to get stabbed, but the general only stalked around him, cutting the zip around his wrists. Austin winced as he felt the cool metal of the knife against his skin.
The black shirts are effective, but overcautious.
General Ferguson severed the duct tape wrapped around Austin's right ankle.
There's no way to eliminate all risk, though.
The general moved over to the left ankle now.
Take that humble shopkeeper, for instance. He was just opening his store. A low-risk proposition ordinarily. Save for the presence of you and your gang.
The image of the old man's bloodied face flashed in Austin's mind, sending a wave of nausea up from his gut.
You're lucky I got to you when I did, Mr. DeSantis,
General Ferguson said after he'd finished cutting Austin free.
You were mere seconds from being processed.
I didn't mean for it to happen, Austin said, his lips quivering.
I know, Mr. DeSantis. We captured your Confederates. We know the whole story. Even if you didn't deal the death blow, felony murder is still murder, and any blood drawn in the act of the robbery is also on your hands.
Cynthia's face appeared in his thoughts, her swollen belly heaving. What happened to them?
They've been processed.
Even Cynthia? She was due in a few weeks. General Ferguson raised an eyebrow.
An unborn child has no rights, DeSantis. It shared its mother's fate.
Another surge of nausea hit him, and Austin thought he might vomit.
I spoke to the Attorney General. He knows you didn't land the killing blow. He's willing to give you immunity from prosecution. That was no small feat. The president ran on the Manpower Readiness Act, and his administration is loath to waive it.
General Ferguson paced over to the window and took the drawstring of the blind in his hand.
But after watching you translate, I assured him you were worth it.
General Ferguson pulled the string on the blind. The alien craft over D.C. filled up Austin's view. It was an awesome horror, TV having done the craft no justice, unable to capture the sheer magnitude of its enormous scale. It looked like a giant metal teardrop hanging from the sky, held aloft by a tether, like a cruise ship held up by a fishing line. Coming down from the craft like a metallic beanstalk was a cylinder, touching down on the ground somewhere in the park next to the high school a little over a mile away.
Did you see what happened in Rome?
General Ferguson asked, gazing out the window.
Or had the black shirts got to you by then?
I saw.
First contact between aliens and humanity. The most seminal moment in human history. Hijacked by some cassock-wearing nobodies. Men so irrelevant that even their own adherents don't bother to show up to their sermons on Sunday.
General Ferguson turned to face Austin.
The aliens asked the Pope to send a delegation of priests up to the mothership. No world leaders, no government officials, just priests.
Austin stared back at the general, not daring to open his mouth.
The president went ballistic,
General Ferguson said, shaking his head.
He thought it'd be suicide if at least one representative of Earth's governments didn't go along. He begged the Pope to include an American representative, practically got down on his knees. Lucky for us, Pope Stephen relented and told the aliens they had to agree to include an American or no one from the Vatican would go at all.
Suicide? The question leaked out of Austin, despite his best efforts to stay silent.
The Chinese think the aliens have a superweapon aboard the mothership. Unless they can be convinced otherwise, they're going to launch their nukes and drag humanity into an all-out war.
Austin tilted his head, wondering why the general was telling him all this. So, the president is sending you to join the delegation? Up on the alien ship? General Ferguson smiled.
Who better than the face of Earth's defense?
Austin rubbed his aching wrists, his muscles still tense. What does this have to do with me?
The DIA has language capacity in 237 languages. Urdu, Pashtun, Minangkabau, hell, they can even translate Xhosa in the event we ever find ourselves in a South African battle space. But when the aliens came down here and started yelling a dead language at us, we were stumped. That's why we need you.
Austin furrowed his brow. Me?
I read your file. You started a whole verbal Latin program at UVA. Got the department to teach spoken and not just written Latin for the first time.
That was a long time ago.
Not that long.
General Ferguson moved closer.
I saw you in that warehouse. How you handled yourself under pressure. You were made for this.
The smell of the bodies, the crack of the rifle rounds. It all rushed back in an instant. There has to be someone better. General Ferguson's face softened, the sharpness of his features easing.
There isn't, DeSantis. Fluent Latin speakers don't grow on trees.
He pointed out the window at the alien craft in the distance.
And my ride to orbit leaves in an hour. We don't have time for an exhaustive search.
Austin's mind conjured the hideous giant alien on TV, and he could feel himself starting to panic again.
I know you're scared,
General Ferguson said, empathy seeping into his tone.
But I'm giving you the chance at a fresh start. This is an opportunity to see that your mother is comfortable in her old age.
Comfortable? Austin couldn't hide the hope in his voice. The corners of General Ferguson's mouth curled up with a feline subtlety.
We'd be sure to top up her FedCoin account with a generous deposit. Yours too. She'd finally be able to move out of that dingy apartment. It's the least we could do in light of the vital service you'd be providing to your nation.
Austin pictured his mother's threadbare nightgown, the long list of things she'd put off buying. He'd left her with nothing, not even enough money for food. And you'll drop the charges?
A clean record,
General Ferguson said, taking a few steps back to lean on the teacher's desk.
Provided, of course, that you cooperate fully. Do everything I say.
As Austin looked out the window at the alien craft, all he could see was a million ways in which he could die. But when he turned back to General Ferguson, he focused on the high school seal. If only he'd said yes all those years ago. When do we start? The smile spread wider across the general's face.
We roll out to the cylinder in half an hour. In the meantime, I'll have one of my attendants get you some water and a change of clothes.
Heading for the door, General Ferguson paused.
One more thing. There will be a Catholic priest accompanying us. He's the director of the Vatican Observatory. The Pope wanted him to join the delegation from Rome. We flew him in from Arizona so he can hitch a ride up with us.
Austin tilted his head, unsure what General Ferguson wanted him to do with this information.
Whatever you do,
General Ferguson continued, the crucifix on the wall framed above his head.
Don't trust him.
Chapter 12.
DeSantis,
General Ferguson said, pointing down the fairway.
Go wait with the priest.
Before Austin could say anything, the general was walking away with a colonel, engrossed in a briefing on fortifications. The priest was about 100 yards ahead, in front of the cylinder. He was dressed all in black, save for his white clerical collar, and he had a mop of salt and pepper hair that clung to his head in undulating waves, only becoming tame where his sideburns met his well-trimmed beard. His gaze was fixed on the cylinder, the silver hue of the structure reflecting off his glasses, making it look like his eyes glowed with excitement. He stood with a slight hunch, exuding a confident casualness, as if he were perfectly at home next to an alien ship. The priest's pose contrasted sharply to the nearby regulars who moved about with a ramrod energy. The cylinder had touched down in Rock Creek Park just east of the high school, turning what was once DC's largest public park into an armed camp. The military had moved in force. On the drive there, Austin's vehicle had passed a column of Abrams tanks so long he thought the Army must have emptied out Fort Knox. The cylinder had come down on the 10th hole green of a public golf course, making it the heart of this new armed camp. The regulars had already constructed a barricade of sandbags around the cylinder, ringing it for 300 yards in every direction. Now they busied themselves setting up additional fortifications under the watchful eye of hundreds of black shirts, their covered faces scanning the scene for disobedience and sloth. The throng of soldiers, however, felt minuscule next to the cylinder. It towered over them like an iron skyscraper, pushing down on the earth with such force that it leveled the putting green into a flat plain. Austin couldn't look away from its mirror-smooth exterior. It reflected nothing, not the still green grass of the fairway, nor the moist brown dirt of the sand trap it had bisected. Austin craned his neck back in an effort to see the top. He was just barely able to make it out. The craft above made the cylinder look small as it hung there like a pristine anvil, ready to drop down at any second to make quick work of the tiny beings below. The sound of a sergeant shouting commands stirred Austin from his trance, and he made his way down the fairway toward the priest.
You sure don't look like a soldier,
the priest said as Austin approached. I'm not, Austin replied curtly.
Then what brings you around these parts? Trying to get in a quick 9 before lunch?
Suppressing the urge to grin, Austin said. Are you the Vatican astronomer?
I am.
The priest extended his hand toward Austin.
Francis Ambrose.
Austin instinctively went to take it, but stopped himself. I didn't know the Vatican had an observatory. Father Ambrose held his hand up for a second longer before putting it down.
You're not alone,
he said with undiminished enthusiasm.
But the Vatican Observatory has been operating continuously since 1891. We have one of the most extensive meteorite collections in the world. All part of the Church's mission to promote the sciences.
Promote the sciences? Tell that to Galileo. Father Ambrose's smile grew wider.
Ah, yes. How can we forget the infamous and often misreported case of Galileo? I will admit we could have handled that better. But creating the university system, proposing the theory that supports modern cosmology, and discovering genetic heritability have to count for something in the Church's favor, right?
Father Ambrose's gaze lingered on Austin, as if expecting him to smile back, but Austin was resolved not to give him the satisfaction. Let me get this straight. The Vatican has an observatory, but it's in Arizona, and it's filled with a bunch of priest astronomers. And the Pope asked you, its director, to join a delegation up to an alien mothership?
That just about sums it up,
Father Ambrose said, still cracking a mischievous smile.
I'm not sure how useful my PhD in astrophysics will be for dealing with alien first contact, but as my dear mother used to say, if you don't want to be told by the Pope to go up to an alien spaceship, then don't join the priesthood.
It was all Austin could do not to laugh. Despite the general's warning, it was hard not to like the priest. Aliens landed on Earth, but that still might be the strangest thing I've heard all day.
If you think that's weird,
Father Ambrose shot back with a twinkle.
I'll tell you about the time the creator of the universe became a human, was executed, and then rose from the dead.
This time Austin couldn't contain himself, and he chuckled aloud.
Quite an elaborate way to kill us.
Austin looked back to see General Ferguson approaching. His laughter evaporated in an instant.
Wouldn't you say, Father?
Ah, General Ferguson.
Father Ambrose peered toward the approaching general.
The illustrious face of Earth's defense. It's a pleasure to meet you in person after all these years of watching you on television.
Father Ambrose extended his hand to General Ferguson, who, like Austin, let it hang there.
I suppose they'd like to watch us suffer,
General Ferguson continued.
Seems like the only reason to get up close like this.
Father Ambrose tilted his head.
They're pilgrims, General, not butchers.
Of course you would say that,
General Ferguson coolly replied.
Gullibility is a prerequisite for someone in your line of work.
Oh?
Father Ambrose said, unperturbed.
Have I been crazy to believe in the premise? The very argument you've been proclaiming to the world these past 5 years?
Yes.
General Ferguson crossed his hands behind his back and craned his neck up at the craft above.
A noble lie meant to keep society from ripping itself apart. That's something you and your church know all about. Don't you, Father?
The hairs on Austin's neck stood up.
You're right, General. I know all about lies.
Father Ambrose put his hands behind his back, mirroring the general's pose.
I also know devious men have a tendency to see lies wherever they look. All the more so when the truth is smacking them right upside the face.
General Ferguson lowered his head to look the priest in the eyes.
You think their faith is sincere?
I do.
Why?
Because they profess it to be so, and I see no reason for them to lie.
No reason to lie? The reason is staring us right in the face.
Father Ambrose scrunched up his nose in confusion.
Enlighten me.
It's power, Father.
Pure power.
General Ferguson narrowed his eyes.
Power is the reason the cat plays with the mouse before devouring it, why the pharaoh builds the pyramids, and why the alien drops a pillar of steel down from the sky.
Said like a man who only sees power.
Father Ambrose took off his glasses and began cleaning them on his shirt.
One who is blind to compassion and mercy.
Compassion and mercy? Those are mere luxuries for those at the top of the food chain.
The general motioned toward the barricades.
Look around. America's first contact with an alien species. Are there any dignitaries here? Crowds of curious people at the cordon around the park? No. The politicians are off in a secure bunker, and the highways are choked with residents trying to flee. People know that power is what rules the day. That's why your churches have been empty these past years. That's why there's no one here to welcome our visitors. They're all waiting for the moment of truth when the alien's power is unleashed.
Austin began to feel dizzy as General Ferguson's ominous words sank in.
If you're so pessimistic, why are you here?
Father Ambrose asked, casually putting his glasses back on.
Duty, Father,
General Ferguson said flatly.
The Chinese think there's a superweapon up there in the center of the mothership. The president wants me to check it out.
Is there a superweapon?
A hint of curiosity threaded through the priest's tone.
That's what I'm here to find out. But so long as the commies think there's a superweapon, they're liable to start a war.
If there isn't one, does the president think you can persuade the Chinese otherwise?
He does,
General Ferguson said, glancing up at the craft.
But it really doesn't matter. Weapon or not, we're only prolonging the inevitable. Whether China fires the first shot or the aliens do, war is coming.
Austin thought of his mother. What good would his fresh start be if war still came in the end? His mind raced as he tried to decipher whether General Ferguson was telling the truth or just trying to wrongfoot the priest. The sound of hundreds of rifles cocking all at once broke his trance.
It's opening!
A soldier shouted from behind them. A crack appeared on the perfectly silver wall, a dark slit 30 feet high. As Austin watched, the gap widened, the metal soundlessly folding to the side like the opening of a stage curtain.
I'd sure like to know your name,
Father Ambrose whispered to Austin.
before we step into the unknown together.
Austin looked at Father Ambrose. A welcoming smile spread across his bearded face, and then at General Ferguson standing in a warrior's pose, his eyes narrow. Without a word, Austin turned back to the cylinder, bracing himself for whatever was about to come through that door. From the corner of his eye, he saw the smile fade from Father Ambrose's face. Chapter 13. A dark hallway stretched out before them, a canyon of midnight on an otherwise sunny October day. Silence hung heavy in the air. The only sound Austin could hear was the whisper of a faint breeze in his ears, as if every soldier gathered behind him was collectively holding their breath. The color of the hallway began to change, a faint blue filling up the darkness just as a robot appeared at the threshold. It looked just like the ones Austin had seen on TV in Rome. An ovoidal torso made from the same silver metal as the cylinder and tubular arms and legs without any noticeable joints. But unlike those robots on TV, whose domed heads glowed a deep crimson, this robot's head glowed a pale blue.
Get ready, DeSantis,
General Ferguson grunted.
I don't want to miss a single word.
DeSantis!
Father Ambrose chuckled.
What a splendid name! Thank goodness you're here. I nearly flunked Latin in seminary.
Austin stayed silent, his gaze fixed on the robot, the glow of its head eerily hypnotic.
Secreme.
The voice filled Austin's ears, almost as if the robot were standing right next to him. Its voice was higher than the seismic bass of the robots in Rome. More like a tenor, and much more pleasant. It says to follow him, Austin translated. The robot withdrew back into the cylinder.
Let's go then.
General Ferguson strode toward the opening. Father Ambrose and Austin followed close behind. Reaching the threshold, Austin hesitated, but the general marched through as if stepping onto an alien ship were an everyday occurrence. Austin, however, was not so brave.
Where are my manners?
Father Ambrose said, stopping to wait for Austin.
Brains before beauty.
Austin's legs still wouldn't move.
It's okay,
Father Ambrose insisted.
You can do this.
The pale blue glow of the robot's head was fading as it got farther and farther away. They didn't have much time before it would disappear completely into the dark.
I'll be right here with you,
Father Ambrose said. Closing his eyes, Austin took a deep breath and stepped forward, his foot landing on a firm surface.
There you go,
Father Ambrose said encouragingly.
Just another walk in the park.
Austin concentrated on his breathing, doing his best to compose himself as he hurried to catch up. Soon he was right behind General Ferguson and the robot, its steely legs moving with such grace that its footfalls made no sound on the metal floor. They walked only a little bit farther before they came upon a brightly lit silver wall. A dead end. But as the robot approached, the wall folded away like a drape. It felt surreal, like stepping into a dream. Austin found himself in what looked like the drawing room of a Victorian mansion. Mahogany walls drenched with gold inlay surrounded him, their textured facade sucking the colors out of the Persian rug beneath his feet. The air carried the familiar scent of a wood-burning fire, the source of which was a marble hearth on the far side of the room. Around the fireplace were 3 plush sofas, their overstuffed cushions practically begging the 3 of them to partake in the fire's soothing glow. On another wall, Austin saw a door leading to a washroom with polished travertine tiles in front of a crystal-handled sink and a gold commode. To his left stood the pièce de résistance, though, an ivory table covered in an abundance of food, its delicacies piled so high that Austin thought he might be smothered by a tidal wave of honey ham and caviar. He hadn't seen food like this in 5 years.
Geneo quaeso indulgeas,
the robot said in its sonorous voice.
Iter Paulo minusquam 2 horas durabit.
Please make yourselves comfortable. The journey will take just under 2 hours.
Comfortable?
Father Ambrose chuckled.
I'm worried I'll be so comfortable I won't want to leave.
The floor beneath them shifted, and all 3 of them flinched, reaching out for something to steady themselves.
Noli timere.
Don't be alarmed.
Ascendere coebimus.
Have started our ascent.
Maiorem quam viginti quinque sentissimis variationem gravitatis non experieris.
You will not experience... Austin paused, wondering if he'd heard correctly. Gravitational variance greater than 25%.
I think he means we're only going to pull between 0.75 and 1.25 Gs,
General Ferguson said.
We don't have to worry about floating up to the ceiling.
Father Ambrose wasted no time, making his way over to the food table and generously drowning a shrimp in some cocktail sauce.
Well, that's good to hear,
he said between chews.
I get indigestion when I eat upside down.
You're braver than me, Padre,
General Ferguson sneered.
2 minutes in and you're shoveling your mouth full of alien food.
Would you like some?
Father Ambrose offered a prawn to General Ferguson.
We don't want to be rude to our hosts.
Rude?
General Ferguson stretched out the word as if he were torturing it on the rack.
I'll tell you what's rude. For the last 5 years, we've sent hails at every frequency, in every language, trying to open a line of communication to the alien ship as it careened toward Earth. And what do we hear? Nothing.
General Ferguson stalked up to the robot.
I'd like to know why they thought it was okay to invade our airspace and drop down from the sky without so much as a hello first.
General Ferguson glared at Austin.
Me?
Austin asked sheepishly.
Do I look like I speak Latin?
General Ferguson growled. Why did you not respond to our messages? Austin asked in Latin once he'd regained his composure.
Quia sumus pontifex numquam nos salutavit.
What did it say?
It said, because the Supreme Pontiff never hailed us. Father Ambrose erupted into laughter, causing cracker crumbs to cascade onto his shirt.
If only you'd asked Pope Stephen for a hand, General, we could have cleared everything up 5 years ago.
General Ferguson shot Father Ambrose a stern glance before redirecting his attention back to the robot.
Now you listen,
he said, his finger just inches from the robot's pale blue head.
The United States of America?
Austin DeSantis.
The robot interrupted.
Quid tu hic?
Austin's mouth became dry at the sound of his name coming from the robot.
Austin. What a great first name,
Father Ambrose said, oblivious to the fact that the robot was asking Austin why he was there, insinuating he was an unwelcome addition.
Pope Stephen said there would be only one other, a military commander. Yet you are here as well, attending the inspection.
What's it saying, DeSantis?
General Ferguson demanded. Austin's legs wobbled as he imagined himself being chucked out into space like unwanted cargo.
You are not a soldier, though. No, you speak the language of the Holy Church.
DeSantis?
Ah, yes, you are a teacher, one who transmits knowledge to the young. But a few days ago your master released you, sent you away without recompense.
Sweat began to pour from Austin's brow. How did the robot know so much?
Are you okay, Austin?
Father Ambrose asked.
There is more, Austin DeSantis. More that you hide.
Austin's breath caught in his throat as shame mixed with terror.
You seek the one they call Aurelia, spending hours gaping at her image, as if when you espouse her when you are alone, your flesh is actually made one.
DeSantis? Answer me!
You are tortured by this fiction. It has caused you and the ones you love great pain.
Austin felt himself getting lightheaded, his body doing everything it could to avoid passing out.
Unburden yourself, Austin, for you will only be free when you follow the way, the truth, and the life.
DeSantis, so help me!
Austin had to cooperate fully. That was the deal. He opened his mouth, about to translate and speak his secrets into the world, but he closed it again before any words came out.
If you don't tell me right now, I'll—
Hello, robot sir.
Father Ambrose interjected, stepping into the space between Austin and General Ferguson.
We haven't been properly introduced. What do we call you? Do you have a name?
Austin's eyes went wide as the robot bowed deeply in Father Ambrose's direction.
My apologies, Father. Please forgive my ill manners. My name is Virgil. It is my great honor to be your host.
The room fell silent, the revelation leaving them all stunned.
You can speak English?
Father Ambrose asked, nearly dropping the Gruyere-covered cracker still in his hand.
Yes, Father,
Virgil said in his melodious voice.
For you, our most honored guest, I am happy to speak in whatever language you prefer.
Oh, well, that's very kind of you,
Father Ambrose replied.
Perhaps we can speak in English and give poor Austin a break.
As you wish, Father.
General Ferguson glared at Austin, his eyes narrow on his craggy face.
Please take a seat and rest. There will be much to see during your inspection, and I must get back to my prayers.
Virgil glided to the corner of the living room, got down on his knees, and made the sign of the cross. Austin looked back at General Ferguson to register his reaction to a robot praying off in the corner, but he found that Ferguson's gaze hadn't moved. His narrow eyes were still trained on Austin. Austin's throat tightened. He realized the one thing he'd brought to the table, the thing that had saved his head from a bullet, had evaporated the instant the robot spoke English. Now there was no telling what the general would do. Chapter 14. The room was quiet, save for the crack of the fire and the sporadic hum of Father Ambrose's snores. They'd been in the Victorian living room for over 90 minutes, each on his own sofa. The alien robot was still on its knees in the corner, hands clasped in prayer. The general sat unmoving on his couch, his thoughts impenetrable to anyone but himself. Austin still hadn't translated what Virgil had said earlier, and the revelation that he was totally redundant still occupied his mind. Even if he did reveal what Virgil had said to him, how would he explain Aurelia? Maybe the general already knew. If he didn't, though, Austin would only sink lower in his eyes, going from utterly useless to a major liability. Austin's mother strayed into his thoughts again. Wherever she was, he knew she was broken. Her worst fear, that her son would be taken from her, having come to pass. Not only that, but she'd have to beg Mr. Washington and the Armstrongs for food. He could have made that right, given her a gift that made all her suffering worth it. But he'd blown it with the general, ruined another opportunity for success, just like he had his whole life.
DeSantis?
General Ferguson materialized next to Austin's couch with a feline silence, catching Austin off guard. "I'm sorry, sir," Austin pleaded. "I didn't mean to freeze, but it knew things about me. Things no one else knows, and—"
It's all right, DeSantis.
Austin paused, searching General Ferguson's face for signs of irony, but finding none. "Sir?"
What is the first assumption of alien capability?
Austin winced, his mind filling with the image of the kind old man's bloody back, the cold gaze of Lieutenant Wu as she wielded her whip. Cyber dominance?
That's right. This is what complete dominance of the digital domain looks like. Anytime you've touched a keyboard or used a phone, they have it, and they can call it up in an instant, giving them a signals intelligence advantage beyond anything we've ever dreamed of.
All of it. They could see all of it. Austin cringed at the idea of the aliens knowing all that about him.
We have to stick together, DeSantis. We're on enemy territory. They have the advantage, and there's no telling what they might throw our way.
But, sir, the robot speaks English. You don't need me anymore. General Ferguson furrowed his brow.
Don't be ridiculous, DeSantis. We're going to be linking up with the rest of the Vatican delegation up there. I wouldn't put it past those clerics to switch back to Latin just to keep me out of the loop. I need you, more than ever, to make sure they don't pull any dirty tricks.
A sigh of relief escaped Austin's lips as he felt a weight lift from his shoulders.
Remember what I told you. The Catholics can't be trusted.
General Ferguson gestured to Father Ambrose.
Even if he seems harmless, he's not on our side.
Father Ambrose looked serene, snoring on his couch, but General Ferguson's warning took purchase in Austin's head. The priest's slumber transformed, suddenly seeming sinister. He was far too comfortable here. General Ferguson slipped back to his sofa, resuming his emotionless stare as the orange glow of the fire washed over him. Austin hadn't blown it. Although he'd come close, he'd redouble his efforts to make the general proud and prove he was worthy of the largesse he would receive on the other end.
Father?
Virgil's voice filled the room, his tone soothing, like he was waking a sleeping babe.
Was I asleep?
Father Ambrose rubbed his eyes.
It seems so, Father.
Virgil glided to the fireplace.
We will be arriving at the ship momentarily. I kindly ask that you remain seated. As we change our angular momentum, you will experience microgravity. But do not be alarmed. It will pass quickly.
For a moment, Austin's legs became light, but as quick as it began, it ended, his feet depressing back into the plush Persian rug.
We have arrived,
Virgil said. A vivid light filled the dark room as the mahogany wall behind Virgil folded open. Austin strained to see, but the light coming in was so bright he couldn't see anything on the other side. Following Virgil through this new door, he could hardly believe the sight before his eyes. They had stepped into a pastoral landscape, not a ship with metal hallways or row upon row of alien technology, but a grassy plain, a verdant forest rising up on either side.
It's Edenic,
Father Ambrose said, his voice full of awe.
Not Eden, Father,
Virgil said as he walked into the shin-high grass.
We are all east of there.
Austin looked up, trying to find the ceiling, but all he could see was a bright blue sky.
Virgil?
Father Ambrose asked, pointing to the tree line off to their left.
The forest curves up toward the sky over in that direction.
Father Ambrose did an about-face and pointed again.
Over in that direction, too. Why is that?
Virgil paused in his stride, the blades of grass curling up over his feet.
We are on a rotating habitat, Father. One of 3 similarly sized ones contained within the asteroid that encapsulates our ship.
Virgil then pointed to the forest on the left.
When you look toward the rotational horizon, you can see the curve. The rotation allows us to experience 0.79 Gs at ground level. While this is lower gravity than humans are used to, it is the gravity in which we are most comfortable.
Austin tried to detect whether stepping into a sylvan paradise orbiting high above Earth was surprising to General Ferguson, but if he felt anything, Austin couldn't tell.
Is that the gravity on your home world, Virgil?
Yes, Father.
Fascinating.
Father Ambrose ran a hand over his beard.
Virgil, I've been wondering, what do we call you? Or to say it in another way, what do your people call themselves?
Our people communicate using visual means, Father.
Virgil began walking again.
By changing their skin pigmentation to form symbols. As such, we lack an auditory word for our people. What do you humans call us?
Father Ambrose struck his beard again.
I don't know if there's a consensus, but since your arrival, many humans have taken to calling your people pilgrims, and we have been referring to machines like you as diplomats.
You humans surprise me,
Virgil said, speaking slowly as if he was considering each word.
That nomenclature is incredibly apt. Please feel comfortable referring to us as such going forward.
Father Ambrose shot Austin a jubilant look, seemingly proud of having established the official taxonomy of an alien race. But Austin was careful not to meet his eyes.
Now, we must hurry to the chapel,
Virgil said as a sled appeared, a slab of shiny silver metal that hovered half a foot off the ground with 3 seats on top.
The delegation from the Vatican has already arrived.
Is it in the chapel that you would like to do the perpetual adoration?
Father Ambrose asked, climbing into a seat atop the sled. Virgil positioned himself at the helm.
Yes, Father.
Taking a seat next to General Ferguson, Austin scanned his face to see if he knew what a perpetual adoration was, or that their destination was a chapel, but he appeared as surprised as Austin. As the sled began to move, Austin wondered what other details Father Ambrose was hiding from them. The sled gained speed quickly, soon whipping over the grassy plain so fast the forests on either side blurred. The ground undulated slightly, the sled going up and down gentle grades, which made Austin realize that the terrain was not uniform, but instead textured. At one point, Austin saw a bird that looked very much like a hawk circling above, soaring upward on thermal currents.
Is that the chapel?
Yes, Father.
My God! It's huge!
The priest said as the edifice unfolded before them.
It makes St. Peter's look like a dollhouse!
The sled crested the hill, and the full scale of the chapel came into view. It was constructed of the same silver metal as Virgil, but so large it made the crafts that hovered over cities back on Earth seem insignificant. It stretched out so wide that Austin could see the curvature of the structure as it spread itself across the horizon. Its 12 spires rose up into the air for what seemed like miles, the center spire the tallest of them all. In front of the chapel was a crystal-clear body of water that reflected the majesty of the structure back at itself like a liquid mirror. Austin absorbed it all, transfixed by its beauty. As they drew closer, he spotted the delegation from Rome standing next to another sled parked beside the chapel wall. Austin couldn't get over the strangeness of traveling all the way from Earth to find a group of humans milling around, waiting like they'd made plans to meet up at the local park.
Cardinal Benedetto!
Father Ambrose exclaimed as their sled came to a halt.
Francis!
The cardinal replied in a thick Italian accent. The Vatican delegation consisted of 4 members, the cardinal with his red skull cap and 3 other priests. Accompanying them was another robot identical to Virgil, save for its domed head glowing a soft violet.
Sorry to take you from your lanes, Francis, but His Holiness insisted that you join us.
It's my pleasure, Your Eminence.
Jumping down off the sled, Father Ambrose took the cardinal's hand and kissed his ring. Austin met General Ferguson's eyes. He seemed to be just as discomfited as Austin at having to witness the antiquated display.
When I became an astronomer,
Father Ambrose said,
I never thought I'd end up through the looking glass and up here in space.
It is the mystery of divine providence, the cardinal replied.
Your Eminence.
Father Ambrose turned around and faced Austin and General Ferguson.
I'd like to introduce you to my—
Look!
One of the priests in the cardinal's delegation shouted. A slit had appeared in the chapel wall, hundreds of feet high. Silently, the walls on either side began folding apart. Peering through the giant door, Austin at first saw nothing but a hazy white mist, but then the dot of a silhouette materialized. It grew larger by the second, until suddenly, a giant diplomat stood over them, its domed head glowing a deep crimson.
Pontifex honoratissime.
The giant diplomat's voice boomed, a deep bass that Austin could feel in his gut.
Eo ipso quantuli cades, ecclesiam nostram illuminas, sicut Dominus Deus noster omnem creaturam amore suo illuminat.
Austin leaned over to General Ferguson and translated. Honored Bishop, your presence here illuminates our humble church as the Lord our God illuminates all of creation with his love.
Humble,
General Ferguson snickered.
in arte investigationem tuam incipiamus, ut iudicemus num haec ecclesia sit habitaculum Domino Deo nostro dignum.
Let us begin your inspection in the narthex, Austin said, tripping on the new word.
That's right, Austin.
Father Ambrose said encouragingly.
The narthex is the front room of a church. It's like an antechamber.
Austin shot Father Ambrose a sharp look and leaned even closer to General Ferguson, whispering the rest of the translation. To see if this church is a worthy dwelling place for the Lord our God.
Ecce de propius, nam narthex inges est, et evie de errare periculosum est.
But stay close, Austin translated, the hairs on the back of his neck becoming stiff. For the narthex is vast, and to get lost inside risks peril. The giant diplomat turned around and walked back inside. The violet-headed diplomat followed, as well as the cardinal and his accompanying priests.
They're leaving without you, Father.
General Ferguson pointed at the group up ahead.
Oh, I see.
For the first time, Austin heard Father Ambrose sound deflated.
I just figured since we all rode up together, the three of us would proceed as a group.
Father Ambrose looked at Austin. He knew the father was searching for an ally, and he couldn't help but think of how kind the man had been to him so far. But after a moment, Austin looked up, meeting Father Ambrose's eyes. No, Austin said, trying to ignore the guilt that sat like a rock in his stomach. You're not in our group. A flash of distress streaked across Father Ambrose's face, a reaction he tried to hide, yet Austin saw it. Saying nothing, Father Ambrose walked into the church alone, leaving Austin and General Ferguson to face the peril of the narthex together. Chapter 15. The narthex sprawled endlessly in white obscurity, with no discernible walls, ceiling, or floor. Filled with a thick haze, it was like walking into a cloud. Austin could barely see Virgil as he led them farther inside. If it weren't for his pale blue head shining in the mist, he and the general wouldn't be able to see him at all.
DeSantis,
General Ferguson whispered.
follow my lead.
Even 2 yards away, the general was nearly invisible. He gestured downward with his hand, signaling Austin to slow. Austin complied, and the blue light of Virgil's head faded until it was replaced by a milky nothing. Sir, Austin said, trying to locate General Ferguson's silhouette. How do we know which way to go?
This way, DeSantis.
General Ferguson's voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once. Disoriented, Austin stumbled around, groping for the general. I can't see you, sir.
This way,
the voice said from some unseen place. Squinting his eyes, he walked a few more steps. I still can't. A surge of pain shot up Austin's spine. He fell forward, landing nose first on the floor. A gush of blood rushed from his nostrils. He spun onto his back as fast as he could, covering his face with his hands. Before he could sit up, he felt skinny hands wrap around his neck and squeeze. He tried to call out, but thumbs pressed down hard on his larynx, stifling his vocal cords.
I'm sorry, DeSantis, but you were always going to die.
The bottom of General Ferguson's arms were all Austin could see, his face obscured in the dense mist.
War is coming, and we couldn't let China fire the first shot.
Austin pulled wildly at the hands around his neck, but they wouldn't budge.
We'll claim that the aliens killed you unprovoked. Their species, the one to draw first blood. It will give us the moral high ground, and we need every advantage we can get in the coming war.
He felt a sharp pain behind his eye, the airless blood pooling in his brain, the whiteness fading to black.
Just be glad that you died for a noble cause, that it didn't all end in the warehouse.
Flailing his arms, Austin tried to find something to grab. Just as his vision began to dot, his right hand landed on the general's weathered face. He found the eye socket and pressed his thumb as hard as he could, feeling the soft tissue compress. The grip around his neck loosened, and he felt a trickle of blood returning to his head, the light getting brighter. He heard the general moan in pain, and Austin pushed the man to the side and twisted his body, freeing himself from the hands around his neck. He sucked in air, desperately trying to reoxygenate his blood as he rolled as far away as he could from his attacker. Luckily, the mist concealed him. When he thought he was clear, he got to his feet and ran, charging through the fog like a man possessed. He ran until his breath ran out. Panting, he looked around frantically, but all he saw was whiteness, an endless nothing in every direction. He remembered the giant diplomat's words. The narthex is vast, and to get lost inside risks peril. Panic gripped him as he realized there was no exit in sight. He could wander around for days, weeks, years, and never find a way out.
Help me!
He screamed.
Help me, someone! Please!
It felt like his words stopped in midair, bricked in by the heavy vapor. Falling to his knees, he thought of all the pain he'd caused his mother. He'd intended to make it right, undo the wrongs he'd committed, but that had been an illusion, a fiction fed to him by the government. As the general had said, he was always going to die for what he had done. It was just a matter of how. Not only would his mother live out the rest of her life thinking her son was nothing more than a thief and a murderer, but she'd also do it without any money to her name. All because of him. Unable to keep staring at the vacant landscape, he shut his eyes. When he did, all he could see was the kind old man with Cynthia standing over him, the Fed coin machine in her hands. For the first time since it had happened, he looked straight at what he'd done. He'd killed that man, even if it was Cynthia who'd struck the fatal blow. Liam and Cynthia couldn't have robbed that store without him. They would have had to figure something else out, but Austin couldn't help himself. He'd wanted Aurelia so bad. Damn the consequences. He sat back and clutched his knees to his chest. He was forsaken, doomed to be tormented by his past until thirst took him in this cloud-like tomb. When he had given up all hope, the mist began to change. The white emptiness slowly gave way to a faded blue. As Austin looked on, it grew brighter, the nothing succumbing to its brilliance. Soon, Virgil was standing above him, his pale blue head shining, bathing Austin in a tender glow.
Do not be afraid, Austin,
Virgil said in his sweet voice.
I am with you.
I was lost, Austin stammered.
I know.
Virgil reached out his hand.
But now you are found.
Austin took Virgil's hand. It was like nothing he had ever touched before. The metal felt warm, as though blood flowed underneath it, and it gave off a haptic sensation that made Austin's whole body feel as though it were wrapped in an embrace. The ache of his regret immediately subsided. General Ferguson attacked me, he said, his voice cracking a little.
I know, Austin.
Virgil's tone was soothing.
He will be punished.
How?
Pilgrim justice is harsh and swift. It is how we maintain harmony. And this church is a place of peace, meant to be a dwelling space for the Lord our God. General Ferguson has violated that peace by his violence against you, a transgression of the most serious kind. Only by forfeiting his life will the scales of justice be level.
Austin's eyes widened. You're going to kill General Ferguson?
No. Our leader has decided to show him mercy, for he is kind and gentle.
Austin furrowed his brow. So he gets off scot-free?
No. General Ferguson has been banished. He is being escorted back down to Earth. You shall take his place as the representative from the United States, so as to honor our word to His Holiness Pope Stephen that a non-Vatican representative should be present for the inspection of this church.
Me? Austin felt his heartbeat accelerate. But I'm nobody. Just a translator.
Do not say such things.
Despite the chide, Virgil's voice was consoling.
You are a child of God, worthy of dignity and respect by dint of your creation.
Austin squeezed Virgil's hand, the robot's words like a healing tonic. I meant I don't have the right qualifications. Virgil pulled Austin forward, getting him to walk.
You are as qualified as any human, for there is not one of you that does not suffer from a limited intellect and a short lifespan.
Austin smiled. Just another short-lived human grateful to be rescued from oblivion by this glorious AI.
Austin!
They both stopped at the distant sound. Virgil, do you hear that?
I do.
Austin!
The voice shouted again. They proceeded toward the sound until a figure emerged from the fog. Father? Austin said.
Oh, thank God.
Father Ambrose grabbed Austin's shoulder.
You're okay.
Were you looking for me?
Of course.
Father Ambrose tilted his head as if Austin had asked the craziest question in the world.
I heard you shout for help, so I ran to find you.
Austin grimaced, berating himself for his poor behavior earlier. He hadn't even had the decency to shake the man's hand. You left your group to find me?
What? You sounded like you were in trouble.
Austin saw Father Ambrose looking at his neck. He could already feel the swelling where General Ferguson's hands had been.
Are you sure you're okay?
Yes, Father. I'm better now. I'm sorry about earlier.
All's forgiven, Austin. I'm just glad you're safe.
The kindness in Father Ambrose's eyes sent a pain through his heart.
Come,
Virgil said,
or we will miss the choir.
Taking Father Ambrose's hand as well, Virgil led them both forward to a large clearing, the mist gradually giving way to reveal a night sky above them, every star in the Milky Way visible before their eyes. In the center of the clearing stood the giant diplomat, the smaller violet-headed diplomat next to him, and the cardinal and his priests by their sides. What is this? Austin asked, his curiosity piqued. Before Virgil could answer, the room erupted in music, a transcendent melody that resonated within Austin's every fiber. It felt as though each cell in his body were singing, harmonizing with the ethereal song that scored the night sky. The stars themselves seemed to move with the music, coming closer so that they went from little dots in the distance to large orbs, dancing around all those gathered there as they poured out music and light.
It's glorious.
Father Ambrose exclaimed as the music swelled, the view of the night sky shifting to focus on a nebula, a rampage of color and swirling gas. Austin felt transported, the despair he'd felt earlier evaporating, replaced by a glory inside him like none he'd ever known. Turning to Virgil, he stared at his blue head. I want to see more. Please, let me. Virgil's hand still lay sweetly in Austin's own.
As you wish.
The globes of light disappeared, and in their place were pilgrims, surrounding Austin in every direction, including above him, their tentacle skirts wriggling. The ones above looked as if they were propped up on air, ready to fall down and smother him, writhing appendages and all. Austin understood, in a flash of realization. The beautiful music was coming from this pilgrim choir. His heart swelled in gratitude for Virgil for making sure that he hadn't missed this extraordinary experience. But then, in the middle of a note, when Austin was sure the choir was rising to a crescendo, the music stopped. It was as jarring as a car crash, the night sky disappearing to be replaced by an empty expanse of white as the Pilgrims swiftly retreated into the mist. "What happened?" Austin asked. Virgil pulled his hand away. His head was no longer blue, the soft glow replaced by a foreboding crimson.
Necesse investigationem differe.
The giant diplomat bellowed, its deep bass voice grating after the sublimity of the choir.
Michael mortus est.
Austin,
Father Ambrose said.
what did the big diplomat say?
Austin's mouth went dry. He said, "We must postpone the inspection." Father Ambrose tilted his head.
Did he say why?
"Yes, because Michael is dead." Chapter 16.
Who is Michael?
For the 100th time, I don't know.
Does the priest know?
The priest has a name.
I'm sure he does, kid.
The captain leaned forward. "Where is he?" Austin demanded, returning the gesture in kind.
He's fine.
"I'm not answering any more questions until I see him." Austin held his pose, inches from the captain's face. The captain stared back into Austin's eyes for a moment before relenting and sitting back in his chair. Austin had been taken back to the high school, this time the boys' locker room, and was sitting at a folding table across from his interrogator, the smell of puberty hanging in the air. They had brought him here as soon as he had arrived back on Earth, while Father Ambrose was spirited off to some place unknown. In addition to the captain questioning him, 2 black shirts guarded the exit, black balaclavas covering their faces.
What makes you think you can make demands?
"Because of this!" Austin gestured to the bruises on his neck. "Thanks to General Ferguson, I'm now the United States of America's representative to the Pilgrims." Leaning back in his seat, he added, "So, you can either let me see Father Ambrose, or I can just sit here quietly and make sure the U.S. government doesn't have any relationship with the Pilgrims at all. Your call." The captain sat wordlessly for a breath before picking up his manila folder and walking out of the locker room. Austin smiled, glad to have the upper hand for once. "Excuse me," he said to the black shirts. "Is there any chance you could get me a glass of water? I'm thirsty." The taller of the black shirts shouldered his rifle and lumbered toward him. By pure instinct, Austin slid back into his chair.
What?
The black shirt leaned his sizable frame on the table, his voice as comforting as a sand blaster. I don't know who else to ask." The black shirt leaned in further, pulling down the front of his balaclava to reveal a scar that cut across his face from his left temple all the way down to his upper lip.
Do I look like a waiter?
The man's low growl sent a sliver of fear through Austin, and his legs began to tremble.
"Leave him alone, Sarge,"
the other black shirt said, the feminine voice thick with a Mississippi twang.
"Not worth the trouble with the brass."
Grumbling, Sarge walked away, pulling up his balaclava as he did so. The other black shirt approached.
"Tell me something,"
she said, tugging down the front of her balaclava. Austin was dumbstruck by the sight of her. It had never occurred to him that there could be women underneath those black uniforms. It was true that the black shirts had stringent size requirements, but they weren't so extreme that an above-average-sized woman couldn't qualify. Obedience was prized more than stature, after all.
"What was it like up there?"
Where?" Austin asked, mesmerized by her green eyes that shone against her wine-dark skin.
"You know."
She said, her twang drawing out the words as she nodded up at the ceiling.
"Up there."
You mean on the ship?" She shot him an exasperated look. He blushed. "It was," he managed to eventually say, the whole experience eluding summary as he got lost in her gaze. "It was the opposite of everything I expected." She smiled, a crooked smile that twisted her dimple.
"I always wanted to go to space,"
she said, her voice somewhere distant.
"ever since I was a little girl."
Austin stared back at her, wishing he could have met her all those years ago. "Come with me." Austin snapped out of it at the sound of the captain's voice. He was standing in the locker room entrance with 2 new black shirts by his side. "Are you taking me to see Father Ambrose? Austin replied as the most beautiful black shirt he'd ever seen yanked the balaclava back over her face.
You'll see.
The captain made his way over and lifted Austin to his feet with a tight grip around Austin's forearm, and then led him out of the locker room and into the school gymnasium. The gym was covered in equipment, banks of monitors and comms panels lined up in rows. A dozen regulars ran back and forth, manning the machines. The captain led him through a door on the far side of the gym, and as Austin stepped through, he realized he was in the wrestling room. The floor was covered wall to wall in mats, the ceiling so low it felt like a cave. The captain guided Austin to a chair in the center of the room, positioned in front of a long table lined with military brass. On the left side of the table sat General Ferguson, looking smug in his dress A's, one eye bloodshot and not a hint of regret on his face.
You!
Austin seethed.
What are you doing here?
The captain forcefully shoved Austin into the seat.
Is this him?
The military brass all stood bolt upright as the black shirts pulled Austin up onto his feet. Secretary of Defense Ramirez strode into the room, her unmistakable presence commanding attention. She took her seat at the center of the table, a head shorter than all the generals gathered there, but somehow looming larger. The normally soft expression she had when talking to reporters or giving a speech from her homey office in the Pentagon was nowhere to be found, replaced by a stern sharpness. But Austin felt a flicker of relief nonetheless. She would make sure General Ferguson got what was coming to him.
It is, Madam Secretary.
General Ferguson replied as he and the other generals sat back down.
He doesn't inspire much confidence,
she said, raising an eyebrow.
I'm glad you're here, Madam Secretary.
Austin pointed at General Ferguson.
When I was on the ship, General Ferguson...
Max?
Secretary Ramirez looked in General Ferguson's direction.
Why is he speaking?
He's stupid, Madam Secretary.
Stupid.
Yes, ma'am.
How stupid?
The perfect amount, ma'am. Thinks he knows everything already.
I see.
Secretary Ramirez stroked her chin.
A know-it-all.
He's a madman,
Austin protested.
He tried to kill me. He strangled me up on the ship.
Secretary Ramirez's eyes narrowed as she focused on General Ferguson.
Max, is that true?
Austin leaned forward, savoring the moment. The truth was finally coming out. General Ferguson grinned.
Every single word.
Max.
Secretary Ramirez shook her head.
This is extremely troubling.
It was all Austin could do to contain himself, glad he could be there to witness General Ferguson's fall. Secretary Ramirez pointed at Austin.
You didn't say anything to POTUS and me about strangling.
It just felt right, ma'am. The kid looked like he needed a good strangle.
She chuckled, a smile bursting forth on her face.
You always did know how to lay it on thick, Max. Well done.
Austin felt the hope that had risen immediately drain away. He wanted to lie down on the wrestling mat and disappear. It was like he was in some sort of waking nightmare, everything he thought he knew reversed.
The president ordered me beat up?
He whispered, his internal monologue leaking out into the room.
It was a matter of national security.
But why?
It was less of a question and more of a plea, a desperate incantation meant to ward off complete insanity.
It's all part of your cover, Mr. DeSantis.
Secretary Ramirez turned to General Ferguson.
Let's get him briefed on the next phase.
What do you mean, a cover?
Oh, Max, I don't have the patience for this kind of dumb.
I understand, Madam Secretary.
General Ferguson patted the air in front of him in an easy now motion.
Let me see if I can spell it out for him.
General Ferguson turned back toward Austin.
You're old enough to remember the war in Afghanistan, right, DeSantis?
Austin stared back, his face only able to convey a mixture of shell shock and rage.
How about green on blue attacks? Does that ring a bell?
General Ferguson let the silence persist for a moment before continuing.
That's okay. You were a bit young at the time. A green on blue attack was when Afghan soldiers Soldiers we, trained and equipped, would turn on their coalition counterparts and attack them.
None of this rang a bell. By the time Austin had been old enough to pay attention to the war in Afghanistan, it was basically over.
Imagine it. Someone you've worked with, someone you trusted, suddenly turning their gun on you when you least expect it. Words can't describe the horror.
A look of sorrow flashed across General Ferguson's face. For a second, he wasn't in the room. He was in his past, and it occurred to Austin this was not an abstraction for him.
The Taliban were weak, no match for us. But they found our weakness, our trust, and by exploiting it, they were able to win the war.
General Ferguson paused again, as if he'd lost his train of thought. After a second, he cleared his throat and started again.
That's why it's essential the aliens trust you, DeSantis. They're too powerful. Their trust is the only vulnerability we'll ever be able to exploit. That's how you fight asymmetric war.
Austin tried to figure out how General Ferguson could have mistaken that diatribe for an explanation. So, Austin gritted his teeth, you want to use their trust against them? That's why you tried to kill me?
Yes.
But why? That doesn't make any sense! The general shrugged.
I had to make them hate me.
How in the world does that get them to trust you?
It doesn't. It's how I get them to trust you.
Austin opened his mouth, ready to hurl an insult, but paused momentarily. I'm your translator. If they don't trust you, they won't trust me.
No.
General Ferguson leaned forward on the table, putting his weight on his elbows.
I deliberately drove a wedge between you and me, making it seem like we aren't on the same team.
We aren't on the same team! You tried to kill me, you psychopath!
Oh, come on. Not this again.
Austin could feel the mist, the cold chill encircling him. It was like he was back there in the oblivion. General Ferguson had done that to him, and he wouldn't forget it. He could say it was an act, but he'd felt the man's rage, his lust for blood.
DeSantis, I'm trying to tell you that was all part of your cover. You weren't in any real danger. I wasn't going to let anything bad happen to you.
Liar! You did it when no one was looking. Out of sight! You did it because you wanted to!
DeSantis,
General Ferguson said with a sigh, as though he thought Austin were the biggest idiot he'd ever met.
I had to do it out of sight to make them believe I was trying to hide it. It was all meant to sell the act. That way I could make it appear as if you're against me, the sort of person who'd make a trustworthy friend to the aliens. But there is no out of sight up there. They were always looking, and we knew that.
Austin again opened his mouth to yell, but hesitated, the general's words sinking in.
They traveled across the galaxy. You think they don't have cameras and microphones literally everywhere? That ship is a panopticon. They saw every breath we took, every word I whispered, every blow I landed while you were down there in the fog.
Austin searched his memory. I didn't see any cameras.
Come on, DeSantis, you know it's true.
General Ferguson's face softened like he was trying to soothe a child. A sick feeling settled in Austin's stomach. He was being used this whole time, and he'd been too thick to notice. Why not just be nice to them? Austin's voice was barely above a whisper. Get them to trust you that way.
Don't be ridiculous, DeSantis. I'm a general in the U.S. military. A warrior. They could never fully trust me. We needed a nobody. A person who might have a plausible grudge against the government and everything it stood for. A condemned man with nothing left to lose. Someone the aliens felt could be recruited to their side.
Austin scanned the faces of the other generals, desperately trying to determine whether this revelation was true. Secretary Ramirez shook her head.
You didn't really think you were the only person we could find who speaks Latin, did you?
Austin felt his ego pouring out from his feet and pooling on the floor. He was everything they said he was. A nobody. A fool. And he'd actually managed to let himself think that, as the sole representative of his country to an alien race, he mattered in this world.
Charlie, let Mr. DeSantis know about China.
A general all the way on the right end of the table with wings pinned to his chest cleared his throat. At approximately 0600 hours, Beijing time, the Politburo Standing Committee met in an emergency session to authorize a preemptive strike against the alien mothership. The attack will begin in approximately 30 hours, when the Chinese orbital launch platforms are at the optimal place in their orbit relative to the ship. Orbital launch will be followed by launch of land-based ICBMs fired in an anti-rotational orbit. The commies are trying to come at the aliens from both directions to see if they can overwhelm their defenses.
And how will that work out for them, Charlie?
Like shit, ma'am. But they feel like they have no choice. We calculate a 0.07% chance of a successful strike. Even fired at the moment of optimum orbit, missile transit time will still be 6 hours. Ample time for aliens to intercept the warheads.
And the alien response?
We expect a full-scale retaliatory strike across the planet, Madam Secretary. No human survivors expected. Secretary Ramirez leaned forward.
That's what we're up against, Mr. DeSantis. Unless, of course, we can get China to stand down.
That's where you come in.
General Ferguson looked Austin in the eye.
If we can get video of the center of that church and prove to the Chinese that it isn't a superweapon, we might be able to convince them not to attack.
Only a few minutes ago, Austin knew exactly how to feel about the man, a boiling hatred coursing through him. But now the general spoke to Austin as if he were his leader, his savior. Austin could feel the pull of the strings, the tug of the puppet master. You want me to take a video from inside the alien ship? Like a spy?
Yes.
To prove that it's just a church?
Yes.
And you knew whoever Michael was going to die so that you could send me on this mission?
Of course not.
General Ferguson shook his head.
I'm not clairvoyant. My goal on that last trip was simply to set up your cover. We didn't know exactly how we'd use you, only that we would. And now we're using you to stop a war.
Austin wanted to scream at his would-be killer, but the explanation was so plausible. But what if it is a superweapon?
Then we're all dead anyway.
Austin searched General Ferguson's face, looking for signs of sarcasm. There were none. But then Austin's mind moved to Virgil and Father Ambrose. How little he had to work to see where he stood with them, how Virgil had saved him from that prison of regrets. Now, General Ferguson wanted him to work against them, to turn on his newfound friends. What if I refuse?
The immunity deal you negotiated with General Ferguson will be off,
Secretary Ramirez said without a flicker of emotion.
You will be processed for murder, and everyone you know and love, including your mother, will die in a global apocalypse.
Secretary Ramirez stood up, all the generals doing likewise in her wake.
So, what's it going to be? Are you in, or are you out?
Chapter 17. Austin pawed the cold metal hunk in his pocket, careful not to engage the switch. The text had been clear enough. There was only 1 minute of film in the camera, no way to shut it off once it started, and it would start recording only after the 100th turn. Just one crank less, and it wouldn't work at all. One extra, and he'd waste all the film recording the inside of his pocket. The aliens have cyber dominance, they had kept repeating. There's nothing digital, nothing electronic. That's why you need to crank it. That's how the camera gets its power. When he'd asked them if he could just pre-crank the camera up to 99, they'd jumped down his throat, telling him that the static electric charge would show up on the alien's sensors. He'd have to charge the camera right before he got to the center of the church, not a moment sooner, all while remaining unseen. This is what he'd agreed to do. This was his only way out.
You don't believe me, do you, DeSantis?
General Ferguson said as their Humvee turned a corner and the cylinder came into view. Austin kept his eyes forward, trying to will away the dull ache of the bruises on his neck. "No," he finally said.
"That's smart,"
General Ferguson said without a hint of irony. "Is it?" Austin faced the general. "Or is it just the perfect amount of stupid?" A feline smile crept across General Ferguson's face.
"Words, DeSantis. Just words. Ramirez is a politician. Her whole persona is a lie. And politicians are afraid of smart people. They're worried you'll pierce the veneer and see them for what they truly are. I said that to protect you and make sure she didn't change her mind."
"Right." Austin's eyes narrowed. "You tried to kill me for my protection too, I take it?"
"I pretended to try and kill you, DeSantis."
The feline's smile was replaced by a scowl.
"You should be thanking me for making it look so good. The fate of humanity hangs in the balance."
Austin looked away, focusing on the back of the driver's seat. He could still feel the terror he'd felt lying there on the ground, the fingers curled around his neck, the thick and lifeless fog pressing in on him as his vision began to darken. He would never thank General Ferguson for that.
"You think the robot is your friend, don't you?"
"I have no friends."
"You lie, DeSantis."
General Ferguson's voice was higher, like he was on the verge of laughing.
"I didn't get where I am without being able to read people. You like that robot. The priest, too. You think you can trust them."
Austin turned to look out the window, as if by pointing the back of his head at the general, he could stop him from so easily reading his thoughts.
"The aliens are a military force, DeSantis. Of that, I'm sure. And the robot was probably custom-built to befriend you and make you feel seen."
General Ferguson waited, baiting him to respond, but Austin stayed quiet.
"Don't believe me? That's okay. But ask yourself this. Why has your newfound robot friend kept the most important thing secret from you?"
Austin knew what the general was doing, but he caved in anyway. "What's that?"
"Catholic aliens. Does that make any sense to you?"
A chill ran up Austin's spine. "No," he admitted.
"It's a ruse, DeSantis. An enigma. All meant to keep us off balance while the aliens enact their plan. The priest, the pope, all the Catholics, they're so intoxicated with the idea of aliens sharing in their delusion that they'll put up with anything to keep the lunacy chugging along."
With everything Austin had been through since the aliens arrived, this most obvious of questions had slipped from his mind. But now it slammed back to the forefront. How can aliens be Catholic? "Why didn't you ask Virgil on the ride up?" Austin asked.
"The mission is to see what's at the center of that ship. We're trying to stop China from starting a war. Not call out the aliens as liars."
Austin's mind went back to the narthex. He felt Virgil's hand in his own, the haptic embrace, the sense of security and peace. It hadn't felt like a lie.
"Whatever you do, don't bring it up. Your mission is to film the center of their church. We can't risk you getting banished from the ship like me."
The Humvee came to a stop at a newly erected gate at the 10th hole tee box. With each of Austin's visits, the barricades around the cylinder seemed to grow ever wider and more elaborate. Down the fairway, amid the thousands of bustling regulars, Austin could make out Father Ambrose, standing alone outside the cylinder, like a man about to be sacrificed to the volcano. Austin stepped out of the Humvee. "What if the aliens find the camera on me?"
"They'll probably kill you."
General Ferguson exited the Humvee and straightened out his tunic.
"But don't worry, they didn't find it on me."
The general walked over to the nearby guard shack while Austin headed down the fairway to Father Ambrose.
"He's still in uniform? After what he did to you?"
Father Ambrose said, looking past Austin at General Ferguson in the distance.
Didn't you tell them what happened?
I did.
And they did nothing?
A twinge of pain ran up Austin's arm. Politics, Austin said, regretting that he couldn't just tell Father Ambrose the truth. Apparently, you can't just fire the face of Earth's defense. Father Ambrose put his hand on Austin's shoulder.
I'm sorry, Austin. Are you going to be all right?
I'm fine, Father.
Where have you been since we got back?
The memory of the school wrestling room flashed through his head. Debriefings, he lied. Endless debriefings. They wanted to know every detail. What about you?
Oh, they tortured me.
What? Austin's eyes frantically scanned Father Ambrose's body, looking for signs of injury.
Oh, it was rough, Austin. They took me to some barren FEMA trailer, nothing but saltines to eat. I had to sit there quietly without so much as an instruction manual to read.
Father Ambrose's smile spilled out from underneath his beard. Austin laughed, relieved. I'm sure Virgil will have a nice spread waiting for you, Father.
Oh, I'll be happy enough just to see him again. When his head turned crimson, it was like he disappeared, taken over by some unseen controller.
I know what you mean. The whole way back to Earth, I was hoping he'd return to us, tell us what was going on, but no luck. He didn't even say goodbye when we landed.
I sure hope we get the old Virgil back. I have a million questions.
Austin nodded. He had only one question, though, one that, thanks to General Ferguson, he couldn't get out of his mind.
It's opening!
A soldier yelled, the sound of hundreds of guns being cocked filling the air. The metal of the cylinder folded away to reveal Virgil, his head glowing pale blue in the late morning light.
I think we have our friend back,
Father Ambrose said excitedly as he made his way toward the opening. Austin felt a tightness in his chest as he followed close behind, the camera like a lead weight in his pocket. When he approached the cylinder threshold, he paused and turned around, taking in Earth one more time. In the distance, beyond the sandbags and long rows of soldiers, he noticed General Ferguson, his eyes trained on him, giving Austin the slightest of nods. Turning around, he followed Virgil and Father Ambrose down the cylinder's dark hallway until they reached the Victorian sitting room, the aroma of the feast laid out on the table welcoming them back.
It's good to see you again, Father,
Virgil said as Father Ambrose went straight for the food.
Are you well?
I'm starving, Virgil.
Father Ambrose grabbed a slice of roasted red pepper pizza that looked like it had come straight out of a brick oven.
The U.S. Army could sure take some hosting lessons from you.
It gratifies me to see you comfortable, Father.
Austin considered food, but the thought of eating while betraying his friends made him queasy. Instead, he walked over to the closest sofa and sat down, letting the warmth of the fire lick his shoulders.
You're truly a wonderful host, Virgil.
Father Ambrose put down the pizza slice.
But to be honest, my mind is far hungrier than my body. I have a million questions for you.
Ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you will find. Knock and the door will be opened.
Amen.
Father Ambrose straightened himself up.
Who was Michael?
Michael was our leader, Father. He was kind and gentle.
Virgil's voice was laced with melancholy.
Unfortunately, he succumbed to his wounds during your inspection.
Austin and Father Ambrose exchanged a look. Wounds? Austin asked.
Earth's higher gravity is taxing on pilgrim biology. Michael was very old. It was too much for him to bear.
Michael. He was the pilgrim who emerged at the Vatican 2 days ago?
Yes, Father.
Austin was transported back to his mother's apartment, watching the replay of the arrival. He recalled the pilgrim had been carried back into the cylinder by the diplomats, looking unwell.
Did he know going down to Earth would be so dangerous?
He was over 5,000 years old. He was aware of the risks.
Earth years or pilgrim years?
Earth years, of course, Father.
Oh, I didn't know it was so obvious.
The pilgrims keep Earth time so as to be coordinated with the liturgical calendar.
Father Ambrose's eyes widened.
I see. What devotion.
Indeed, Father.
But why would he... The words had slipped out before Austin could stop himself.
Why would he what, Austin?
Virgil asked. Sweat pooled in Austin's armpits. Why would a 5,000-year-old alien knowingly risk his life just to stand in front of the Pope? He desperately wanted to know the answer, but he reminded himself of General Ferguson's admonition. Nothing. Forget about it, Austin said, hoping that Virgil would not press him.
There's something else that has been bugging me. Where does the food come from?
The same place all food comes from, Father.
Which is?
A farm.
Father Ambrose shattered into laughter. Austin tilted his head. Of all the things to wonder about, who cared about the food?
Fair enough.
Father Ambrose replied once he caught his breath.
On a more serious note.
Austin leaned in, hoping Father Ambrose was finally going to address the elephant in the room.
Here's one I've been wondering about ever since I was a little boy. Can one travel faster than the speed of light?
Austin let out an exasperated breath.
According to known physics, the speed of light is a fundamental and immutable constraint.
I knew it! You can't get past the cosmic speed limit?
Correct, Father.
And how about us humans?
Father Ambrose grabbed a tureen of escargot.
How is our understanding of physics compared to the Pilgrims?
Elementary, Father. Your theoreticians seem stuck proposing scientific theories that, by definition, cannot be tested by the scientific method. These include the many worlds interpretation, the multiverse, and string theory. Until your leading minds realize this unscientific approach is foolhardy, your knowledge of physics is unlikely to advance.
Ooh, thanks for the blunt assessment.
Father Ambrose laughed, trying to cover his mouth.
I can't wait to drop that bomb at the next American Astronomical Society meeting.
Austin felt a headache coming on, each question that avoided the true mystery increasing the pain. He rubbed his temples in frustration.
What about the narthex, Virgil?
Father Ambrose asked, his tone becoming more serious.
It was like nothing I'd ever seen.
Did you like it, Father?
Very much so. But what was the meaning of it?
The narthex is a liminal space, Father. A place for the congregants to transition their perspective from the everyday to the heavenly, and in doing so, better prepare themselves for the sacrifice of the Mass.
Father Ambrose nearly dropped the tureen. He looked so in awe.
How perfect. To behold the galaxy, the glory of God's creation. To take us away from the trivial things that distract us from the divine.
That is the intention, Father.
And the music. It was transcendent. I can't get it out of my head.
Thank you, Father. The choir has been practicing for centuries.
Centuries? Well, it shows.
Yes, Father. The choir master's standards are very high, and despite my love of singing, I do not possess what is necessary to join.
Austin winced. The difference between a robot singing rather than just playing a song on its speakers was a fascinating riddle that Austin had never contemplated before. But right now, he couldn't care less. The trillion-dollar question still loomed, driving him mad. He rubbed his temples in frustration.
What about your telescopy? You must have arrays that dwarf anything humanity has ever dreamed of.
Yes, Father. Our largest observatory...
Why did Michael do it? Austin blurted out, unable to restrain himself anymore. If he knew he could die, why did he leave the ship? Virgil turned his torso toward Austin, his pale blue head shining down on him.
Michael was nearing death, Austin. His greatest wish was to be physically close to our Lord and Savior. He had to act fast before his senescence overtook him. So when he saw the Pope performing a Mass, he appeared in person, the risk notwithstanding.
Austin looked at Father Ambrose, puzzled.
The Eucharist, Austin. He wanted to be near the Eucharist.
But that makes no sense.
What makes no sense?
Austin could feel the camera in his pocket, burning his thigh. He'd done it, kicked the hornet's nest, risked his mission. But he couldn't stop himself. He had to know what these two were concealing. It doesn't make sense he'd risk his life for... Austin looked at Father Ambrose and then back at Virgil. For some silly religious ritual. The room fell silent, only the crack of the fire filling the air.
It was not for some silly religious ritual.
Virgil's voice was firm.
It was to be close to God, the creator and sustainer of the universe, who was present there in substantial form.
But Michael's an alien! Aliens aren't supposed to believe in God! He glanced over at Father Ambrose. He had gone to eat another snail, but stopped mid-bite. Austin wished he hadn't gone straight after his newfound friend's worldview, but he just couldn't keep silent any longer.
Why not?
Because it's a human superstition. You have science, advanced technology. You don't need superstition and myth to explain things. Virgil was quiet. Nothing but silence from his domed head. Austin looked over to Father Ambrose, wondering if he would still protect him should Virgil decide to throw him out an airlock for his insolence.
I do not understand, Father.
Virgil turned his torso toward Father Ambrose.
Has Austin not studied the proofs of God's existence?
Probably not.
Father Ambrose replied as he went back to eating his escargot.
Most people don't.
How could that be? The proofs are not hidden. They are right there on your internet.
Most people don't think to look. And the ones who do assume, because many of the proofs are so old, that they've been rebutted.
They have not been rebutted. And truth is ageless, Father. The passage of years does not make a true thing less so.
Virgil turned his torso back toward Austin.
The Pilgrims do not believe in God out of superstition. Belief in him is derived via reason and logic.
Austin studied Virgil, examining his head, looking for some way to detect what he was feeling. But his head glowed steady and his metal frame was still, his feelings impenetrable to Austin.
Virgil,
Father Ambrose said after washing down the escargot with a flute of sparkling water.
How many proofs of God's existence do the Pilgrims have?
There are 4,727 arguments that are generally accepted as proofs of God's existence in Pilgrim society. There are 10,872 others that have been proffered, but are at different stages of consensus. Some of the proofs rely on premises one can only support if they possess our knowledge of physics.
Fascinating. Which one of the proofs is the most popular?
The argument from contingency, Father.
From Thomas Aquinas?
Yes, Father. Although Pilgrim philosophers had independently formulated the argument hundreds of millennia before St. Thomas elucidated it in the Summa Theologica.
Oh, the poor angelic doctor. If only he'd known back in the 13th century that the Pilgrims had beaten him to the punch by a few 100,000 years. I, for one, am a fan of the Kalam cosmological argument. Anything that begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, ergo the universe has a cause. It's just so pithy.
It is pithy indeed, Father, and consistent with our latest findings regarding the cosmological origin.
Austin's palms began to dry as he realized his question was not provocative enough to get him ejected from the ship. All the same, something nagged at him.
What's your favorite proof, Virgil?
Mine is not a logical demonstration akin to St. Thomas's 5 ways, but I find it persuasive nonetheless. It is the argument from love. There are compelling reasons to think that love exists in a way that transcends its physical manifestations, which, if true, refutes reductive materialism.
Ah, yes. Love,
Father Ambrose said with a nod.
Often a far swifter path to God than even the purest of reason.
But that still doesn't answer my question, Austin finally said, realizing what was bugging him. Even if Michael believed in God, why would he risk his life for a Christian ritual? How can the Pilgrims be Christian? Christianity is a human invention. The room again went silent, save for the pop of the burning logs. This time he'd done it, pushed the issue too far.
This is a question I cannot answer.
Why not? Austin pressed, his heart pounding in his chest.
Because you're about to find out.
Chapter 18. Virgil stood at the front of the sled like a blue-headed head-on, ferrying them through the fog of the narthex while the mist lapped gently against the sides. He'd been silent since Austin had pressed him on why the Pilgrims were Catholic, retiring to the corner of the Victorian living room to pray. Austin desperately wished he could detect where he stood with the robot, but his steely body gave nothing away. Father Ambrose put a hand to his forehead, trying to peer through the fog.
I don't see Cardinal Benedetto!
The Cardinal and his entourage have already entered the nave, Father.
A wave of relief crested through Austin at the sound of Virgil's voice.
We must catch up with them.
The sled came to a stop in front of a massive silver wall. What's a nave? Austin asked as he and Father Ambrose stepped off.
It's the part of a church where the congregation sits,
Father Ambrose said.
Where all the pews are.
Does that count as the center?
That depends. Virgil, does the church have a transept?
Yes, Father.
Virgil approached the silver wall.
In that case, the transept would be the Oh!
A riot of color exploded onto Father Ambrose's face. The wall had opened to reveal a room that looked like a kaleidoscope, the walls and ceiling covered in a countless number of hues. It was like walking into a shattered rainbow, one that burned your eyes with its radiance, making the empty white of the narthex seem like a bad dream.
It's magnificent,
Father Ambrose marveled as the three of them walked inside. With no mist hindering his line of sight, Austin could finally appreciate the scale of the rooms in the church. They were more like landscapes rather than chambers, the walls a horizon, the ceiling a sky. They had walked only a short distance when the floor abruptly stopped, nothing but empty air in front of them, a black abyss below. Father Ambrose backed away, but Austin leaned over the side, trying to see if he could perceive anything at the bottom. Why is there a cliff in a church?
There is no cliff, Austin,
Virgil replied. What am I looking at then?
A dynamic floor.
Virgil stretched out his leg, extending it over the side of the cliff as if he were going to throw himself over, but then he took a step forward and stopped, seemingly suspended in midair. Austin's eyes widened. How are you not falling?
The floor is preventing me from doing so.
But you're not standing on the floor, you're floating. Virgil took a few more steps farther out from the edge.
I see the issue, Austin. You believe that because you cannot see the floor, it is not there.
Austin looked to Father Ambrose, who was now standing almost 10 yards back, avoiding Austin's eyes. But it is there. Virgil walked onward, floating higher as he did.
Yes, Austin. In order to make full use of the volume of a room, one must employ a dynamic floor. A floor that will automatically rise and lower for each of the individuals within the room. And in order to not impede lines of sight, the floor is transparent.
It took Austin a second to understand what Virgil was talking about, but when he pictured it, it made sense. No matter how large the building, humans were always limited to being on the floor, not utilizing the full volume of the space. The scene in the narthex suddenly made sense to him, the way the pilgrim choir seemed to be floating in the air. He realized now they must have been using a dynamic floor. But if someone is higher than me and I walk under them, won't I just walk into the floor?
The computer that operates the floor is extremely sophisticated. It will make rapid adjustments to prevent that from happening.
Austin looked around at the massive space. It was bigger than any stadium he'd ever visited. In fact, the nave probably could have fit dozens of stadiums inside it with room to spare. How many people can be on the floor at one time?
Approximately 15 million humans, or 14,257,000 pilgrims.
Now that would be one well-attended mass.
Despite his quip, Father Ambrose had a pained look on his face.
Please, let us continue. The Cardinal and his delegation are approaching the transept. We cannot let them get too far ahead.
Austin looked back down. The darkness seemed to go on forever, but if he didn't continue onward, his mission would be lost before it started. He lifted a leg, stretched it out, and fell forward. His stomach dropped, expecting to continue plummeting down, but instead, he landed firmly, his foot resting on air as if it were stone. He took a few more steps, venturing farther out, and started to fill with a childlike delight. "Take a look at this, Father. I'm floating." Austin turned around and noticed Father Ambrose conspicuously looking away. "Don't tell me you're afraid of heights," he said as he made his way back to the priest.
Maybe it's better if you and Virgil just go on ahead without me."
I'm sorry, Father,
Virgil said, gliding back down toward them.
As your host, I am responsible for you. I must stay by your side.
"Come on, Father. You can do it." Father Ambrose gave him a pathetic look.
No, I really can't, Austin.
"You saw me out there. I know it looks like you'll fall, but that's just an illusion. It's kind of fun, actually."
My mind knows you're right, but
Father Ambrose grimaced.
I just can't.
I am sorry, Father. I have failed you as a host. Soon the Cardinal will be too far ahead for you to be part of the inspection, and I will have to take you back to Earth.
The camera became heavier in Austin's pocket. "Why?"
It was Michael's decree, Austin.
"Come on, Father," Austin said, a bit pushier this time. "We've come so far."
Austin, if Father Ambrose is uncomfortable...
"Father, please." Austin tugged on his shirt, trying to coax him. "You need to get over yourself."
Austin, unhand Father Ambrose.
"Come on, it's just a few steps. You'll be fine."
Austin!
Virgil's voice boomed. Austin froze, but his grip did not loosen.
I was 8,
Father Ambrose said, breaking the tension.
I went up on the roof to get a frisbee. I fell off, dropped 2 stories. I was in a coma for 3 days, missed 2 months of school.
"I'm sorry, Father." Austin let go of Father Ambrose's shirt. "I had no idea."
It's okay, Austin. It's just...
Father Ambrose's lips quivered.
My mom was sick. Glioblastoma.
Austin saw a tear leak from Father Ambrose's eye onto his beard.
And while I was in a coma...
Father Ambrose shook his head.
I never got to say goodbye.
Austin's heart started to throb.
That's probably why I started looking up at the sky. That way I could keep my feet firmly planted on the ground, looking up into the beyond. You can't fall when you're on the ground. I couldn't hurt her again.
The nave became small, just the 3 of them with Father Ambrose's loss. Yet Austin could still feel the camera in his pocket, urging him forward.
Perhaps you should look up now, Father.
Virgil's voice was sweet. Austin shot Virgil a severe look. To his surprise, though, Father Ambrose peered up at the ceiling, his bespectacled eyes straining as if focusing on something that wasn't there.
St. Colby?
Father Ambrose said, astonished.
The SS? They're injecting the carbolic acid. He's giving his arm to them freely.
What's going on? Austin asked, following the priest's gaze up, but he didn't see anything.
St. Francis, my namesake. He's preaching to the birds. They're listening. How marvelous.
Virgil?
It's all right, Austin. I'm fine.
What are you looking at?
The saints, Austin. I'm looking at the saints.
Virgil? Austin crossed his arms. What's going on here?
The saints are exemplars, Austin. They show us the way to a life in Christ. Each of the colors on the ceiling and the wall represents one of their stories.
Austin scanned the wall and the ceiling. All I see are random blobs of color.
You have to focus,
Father Ambrose pointed at a dot off in the distance directly over their heads.
Take a look at that red shape and don't look away.
Austin followed Father Ambrose's finger, making sure he was focusing on the right one. At first, nothing happened, but as he stared, the red spot grew larger, drowning out all the other colors until it filled his whole view. The red then began to have texture, and he realized he was looking at a cloak. What's happening?
Keep watching.
His view zoomed out to reveal a bearded man wearing a crimson cloak. He was old and gray, standing in the middle of a stadium. The Colosseum in Rome, no less. But it wasn't the ruin Austin was familiar with. It was alive, throngs of people cheering as legionaries held a pair of lions by chains.
It's Saint Ignatius of Antioch,
Austin heard Father Ambrose say over the din of the crowd, the visage of the Colosseum still filling up his view.
He is one of the Apostolic Fathers, one of the most important theologians of the early church.
You're seeing this too?
I am,
Father Ambrose replied. Austin was marveling at the recreation of the Colosseum, how real the Roman crowd appeared, when suddenly the audience, in unison, let out a collective cry. The legionaries had dropped their chains, setting the lions free. The first of the beasts sank its teeth into the man's shoulder, knocking him over, while the second went straight for the man's ankle, ripping it apart with his fangs. But the man did not scream. With his free arm, he made the sign of the cross, praying as the lions ripped him to pieces. The crowd hushed at the majesty of his end. Austin blinked, and the image was gone. What just happened? Austin rubbed his eyes.
When you focus on a color, the Nave computer directs a beam of light on your retina. Sound is then transmitted using sonic waves that vibrate the jawbone, inducing bone conduction.
Austin nodded, only partly understanding.
It's like the stained glass windows in a church. They're there to tell stories, teach people about the saints and scripture.
Yes, Father, that was the inspiration.
Austin's head darted around. There must have been hundreds of thousands of colored shapes covering the ceiling and the walls. One could stand here for a lifetime and not examine them all. The computer can do all that? And operate the floor too? Austin marveled as his head kept darting around. He noticed a green shape on the far wall. It was the same color as the eyes of the black shirt he'd met in the boys' locker room, the one with the Mississippi twang. The memory of her made his cheeks flush. The computing power must be incredible.
Yes, at least compared to human computers.
Does the computer have a personality like you, Virgil?
No, Austin. The Nave computer does not have a mind. Humans often believe that computational power alone is enough to generate a mind. It is not. The nature of a mind is far more mysterious and complex.
His curiosity running amok, Austin was about to follow up, but he noticed that Father Ambrose was no longer next to him. Father?
The saints, Austin,
Father Ambrose replied, now standing at the edge of the dynamic floor.
They trusted in God's will even to the very end. It's time I followed their example.
Father Ambrose was shivering, at the brink of all he could take. Yet he leapt forward, as if jumping into a swimming pool, and landed on the dynamic floor with a thump. Well done! Austin shouted as Father Ambrose marched ahead. As Austin went to catch up, a feeling of relief coursing through his veins, his gaze landed on a shape the color of Virgil's domed head, one that was conspicuously larger than the rest of the colors. Before he knew it, the pale blue was filling his vision, becoming textured, revealing itself as a shawl. The image pulled back further until he saw a face. A woman's face, her eyes the same color as her shawl. She was smiling at Austin, looking right into his gaze. Austin felt an intense wave of love, like the woman knew him completely, his mere existence filling her with joy. He kept waiting for a scene, some sort of event like the previous image, but none appeared. It was only this woman and her loving stare. A sharp pain shot through Austin's heart. How many hours had he spent leering at Aurelia, drooling over her body without the slightest hint of tenderness in his heart? He felt gross, the folly of his past actions so obvious as he beheld this blessed woman. And yet this woman smiled at him, letting him know he was no less loved. Even without Father Ambrose there to explain, he knew instinctually who this was. It was Mary, Mother of Jesus, and Austin could not bring himself to look away.
Austin,
Virgil said as the image faded.
we must proceed.
I'm sorry. Austin began to walk, trying to catch up to Father Ambrose, who was already a great deal farther ahead. I couldn't take my eyes off her. She was so pure.
Many come to behold the Blessed Mother as they pray. They find she helps direct us toward her Son, our Lord and Savior.
Despite the majesty of the nave and its visions, Virgil's comment caused the nagging question to return to the fore of Austin's mind. Why were the Pilgrims Catholic? Virgil still hadn't answered.
Michael himself will come to pray in the presence of the Blessed Mother later today.
Michael? Didn't he die?
He did, Austin. May God rest his soul.
Austin slowed down. Then how could he come here tonight to pray? Do you mean he'll come in spirit?
No, Austin.
Then how?
We have chosen a new Michael. He is firm but true of heart.
Austin puzzled over this answer for a few steps. Michael isn't a name. It's a title?
Yes, Austin.
What kind of title?
It comes from Scripture. Michael the Archangel, Lord of the heavenly host.
General Ferguson flashed into Austin's mind. Michael's a military commander? He said, the hairs on the back of his neck standing up. Like a general?
Yes.
The word hit Austin like a hammer. General Ferguson was right. The Pilgrims were a military force, and the giant contradiction, the reason why an alien race would be Catholic, remained hidden as he walked deeper into their fortress, an instrument of betrayal in his pocket, the fate of humanity on his back. Chapter 19. The transept had none of the nave's cheer. Gone was the frenzy of color, replaced by a gray ceiling and gray walls. Plumes of dust curled up behind their feet as they walked, the dynamic floor having given way to a chalky desert soil. Austin looked around, trying to identify features that he might find in a church, but all he saw before him was an empty desert, with a craggy rock face breaking up the monotony of the landscape.
This road takes us by the stations of the cross,
Virgil said.
It leads to the center of the transept, but we must take a shortcut after the second station to catch up with the delegation. I'm sorry I cannot show you all the stations, Father, but we were delayed too long in the nave.
Father Ambrose nodded, and the three of them pressed on. Unlike before, why the Pilgrims were Catholic no longer troubled Austin. General Ferguson had been right all along, and this strange church, the Pilgrims' religious affectations, none of it mattered. The only thing that mattered was the mission. As they approached the rock face, it began unfolding to the side, revealing a Roman palace. Ionic columns stretched out before them in rows, with marble statues filling in the gaps in between. It was dim, lit only by a handful of torches, making it feel as if they were entering a tomb. A whisper echoed in Austin's ear.
Higher.
It felt as if a malign spirit were following him.
Who said that?
Father Ambrose's voice faltered.
The Sanhedrin, Father.
Virgil said calmly, continuing to glide forward.
Please, keep up.
Betrayer.
Austin shrunk down as he walked forward, desperately trying to find out where the voice was coming from.
Kill him. He must die.
They turned a corner, and the source of the voices revealed itself. Before him was a crowd of humans clad in ancient garb. They wore simple robes that ended above their sandaled feet. Atop their heads were flat-topped turbans. They didn't so much stand as billow, like kelp under the sea. No one turned to look at the three of them.
There are people here?
Father Ambrose asked.
No, Father. These are only projections.
Blasphemer!
Virgil plunged into the crowd, the projections floating to the side when he came near.
King of the Jews!
Entering the crowd, Austin noticed the people's expressions were as empty as a corpse at a wake. When they arrived at the front, Austin's breath escaped him. Before him was Jesus, hands bound behind his back, cast down on his knees in front of a Roman prefect whose gold-lined toga shimmered in the torchlight. Seeing Jesus on his knees, Austin felt a tightness in his chest. It had been only a few days since he'd been in the same position, kneeling in a dark warehouse, the end of his life close at hand. General Ferguson had saved him from the black shirts and given him a second chance. At that thought, Austin reached into his pocket and flicked the camera's armed switch to on. With his forefinger, he began furiously turning the crank, counting to himself as he did.
This is the first station.
Virgil knelt down in front of Christ.
Jesus is condemned to death by Pilate.
Without hesitation, Father Ambrose knelt as well.
My beloved Jesus,
Virgil began, making the sign of the cross.
It was not Pilate. No, it was my sins that condemned you to die. I beseech you, by the merits of this sorrowful journey, to assist my soul on its journey to eternity. I love you, beloved Jesus. I love you more than I love myself. With all my heart, I repent of ever having offended you. Grant that I may love you always, and then do with me as you will.
His prayer finished, Virgil bent down lower and began to vibrate, his mechanical body, up until now so graceful, rattling like a shaky window pane. Questions flooded into Austin's mind. Why would a robot pray to the point of near seizure? Why would the Pilgrims build this place?
Let us continue to the second station,
Virgil said a few moments later. Austin removed his hand from his pocket, congratulating himself for making it all the way to 37 unnoticed. They exited the palace, and Virgil led them back onto a dirt road that traveled through a narrow valley, scrubby hills covered in thistle on either side. The sky-like ceiling of the ship's interior was darker now, as if dusk were setting upon them. Austin used the time to turn the crank more.
Austin, I've been meaning to thank...
Father Ambrose turned around too quickly for Austin to take his hand out of his pocket.
What are you doing?
He asked, gesturing toward Austin's hand. What do you mean? Frowning at him, the priest waved a hand at him.
What's in your pocket?
Virgil stopped and peered back at the humans. Nothing, Austin said, trying to sound innocent. Father Ambrose's face sharpened.
Austin, what's in your...
Come, Father. We cannot be late.
Searching Father Ambrose's face, Austin silently begged him to relent, but he held his ground. This was it. His betrayal had been discovered not by one of the aliens, but by a member of his own species. Virgil, however, was already walking away. It was enough to get Father Ambrose moving again, though the sour taste of the unanswered question lingered in the air. Cursing himself for almost being discovered, and cursing himself some more for forgetting if he'd stopped on 51 or 52, Austin followed. Not long after, they found themselves amid another crowd.
Look at his crowd.
The projections swayed before them, blocking their path, but Virgil went on, the crowd parting around him as he strode.
King of kings, indeed.
They arrived at the front of the crowd to find Jesus slumped over, blood leaking from his head where a crown of thorns had been pressed into his skull. When a Roman soldier came over with a large beam of wood, prepared to throw it on Christ's back, Austin reminded himself it was only a projection. Before the wood struck down, Jesus stopped him and hoisted the heaving beam onto his own shoulders, bowing under its immense weight. Father Ambrose knelt.
The second station. Jesus accepts his cross.
Virgil followed suit, his metal body once again quaking as he prayed. Before Austin realized it, he was back in the warehouse once again. The crack of the rifles, the men straining for the shadow, the bodies bleeding on the floor. Austin would have done anything, betrayed anyone, to be free of that horror. Yet here before him was Jesus, willingly taking on that burden. The contradiction was too much, and a searing pain shot through his heart. Thoughts of General Ferguson stalked back into his mind, though, offering freedom and comfort for him and his mother. Austin's hand reached for his pocket. He pawed the camera for a moment before his forefinger found the divot and began turning the crank.
Come, we must proceed to Golgotha via the shortcut.
Without warning, Virgil started down the road, walking so fast that Austin and Father Ambrose nearly had to jog to keep up. As Austin debated whether he was on turn 88 or 89, Virgil led them down a narrower path, a crevice only about 6 yards wide. Their journey continued until they saw a crowd in the distance, gathered at the bottom of what looked like a long-abandoned quarry. In the center was a small promontory with 3 crucifixes atop it, a man affixed to each one.
We have caught up with the rest of the delegation, Father.
Guiding them toward the crowd, Virgil directed their attention to the right. Austin turned his head to see a giant diplomat approaching from a wider path that entered the quarry from another side, trailed by the cardinal and his entourage, the violet-headed diplomat bringing up the rear. This time, as they moved through the crowd, the projections barely moved for them. Austin found himself hemmed in by the lifeless specters, their silence somehow more unsettling than the whispers or the cackling that had come before. Virgil stopped a few rows from the front, apparently content to watch the execution amid the throng. From here, they were close enough that Austin could read the Latin on the sign nailed to the top of the center crucifix. Jesus Nazarenus, Rex Iudaeorum. Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. This was the center of the whole church, the transept, and there was no superweapon, as far as he could see. Just a lifelike recreation of the crucifixion. Relief washed over him at the realization that all he had to do was to record the scene and get back home, a war averted, his freedom attained. The projections, however, blocked his way. He'd have to find another vantage point to do what he'd been sent here to do. Pressing further into the crowd, Austin made his way toward the very front. He tried to push the spectral figures out of the way, but when he pressed against them, all he felt was a hollow sensation that caused the hair on his arms to stiffen. Eventually, he reached a spot at the front where there were no projections to obscure the camera's line of sight. Virgil and Father Ambrose remained a few rows back. He hoped they were distant enough that they wouldn't notice him sticking his hand into his pocket and cranking the camera once again. 88, 89, 90... The techs had shown him how to hold the camera. Low down by his side, cupped in his palm, lens pointed at the subject. He'd then count to 60, the total length of time before the camera exhausted its film. Then all he had to do was put it back into his pocket and return to Earth with his prize. 93, 94, 95. As he turned the crank, his attention was drawn to Jesus on the cross. Each breath seemed like agony. The weight of his body pulled him down, compressing his chest. He had to put all his weight on his brutalized arms just to take in air. His naked body was covered in lash marks, the skin torn apart like the kind old man at the muster. 96, 97, 98. Austin was gripping the camera, having taken it out of his pocket, when Jesus' eyes locked onto his. It was just a projection, but Austin could feel the gaze, judging his betrayal, calling him to love. His heart wrenched at the sight of it.
Virgil?
Austin flinched so violently that he nearly dropped the camera. Father Ambrose was next to him, he and Virgil having approached unnoticed.
Do congregants need to pass through here on their way to communion?
Yes, Father. The congregants take communion at the altar rail in the chancel, but they must pass the crucified Christ on their way there.
Chancel? Austin asked, sweat dripping from his brow.
The chancel is where the altar is located. It's the heart of the church, its spiritual center, where Christ's sacrifice is represented at every Mass.
Austin's stomach twisted. He'd misunderstood. He'd found the physical center of the church, but not the heart. And he'd charged the camera prematurely, precisely what the text had warned him not to do. Austin trembled as he looked to his right and saw the giant diplomat striding toward him, bathing the area in its crimson glow. His grip on the camera tightened involuntarily as he felt it looking at him, sensing the static electric charge in his hand, ready to reveal him as a traitor. He felt exposed. His eyes darted around as he wondered what to do, but a loud crack and a blood-curdling scream cut through his racing thoughts. Startled, Austin jumped back, his gaze shooting to the Roman soldier with a giant wooden mallet in his hand. The man being crucified to Jesus' right had had his shins broken open, the tibia jutting out in a splintered mess. Another soldier was lining up his mallet on the man to Jesus' left, about to swing it down. A moment later, he did so, and the transept again filled with a scream. Austin fell backward, the projections closing in around him. He could still see the promontory, though, his line of sight still unblocked. A third soldier appeared, thrusting a spear into Jesus' side. The sound of tearing flesh echoed, unnaturally amplified. Blood poured from the wound, followed by water as the last drops of life hit the ground. Austin watched in horrified awe as the giant diplomat leaned over him, its crimson head filling up his view. He knew he was done for, the object of betrayal right there in his hand. But before he could cry out for mercy, the transept went dark, and the air filled with a resounding wail. Chapter 20.
Qui peccata nostra ipse pertulit in corpore suo super lignum.
The crimson glow of the giant diplomat washed over Austin as he cowered in the dirt.
Ut peccatis mortui justitiae vivamus, quis labore sanatis estis.
The light returned to the transept, the darkness vanishing in an instant. The giant diplomat was still looming over Austin like a colossus, but now the crowd had vanished. Only the delegation was still there, save for two men on a ladder carefully taking Jesus down from the cross, and Mary sitting at the foot of the cross, cloaked in her pale blue shawl.
Austin,
Father Ambrose asked.
what did the diplomat say?
Trying to compose himself, Austin got back up on his feet, the camera like a hot coal in his clenched fist. He said, "He himself bore our sins in his body upon the cross so that, free from sin, we might live for righteousness. By his wounds you have been healed."
Amen,
Father Ambrose said, making the sign of the cross. Austin looked to the cardinal, hoping that the elderly bishop would do something to distract the giant diplomat, if only for a moment. But Cardinal Benedetto was on his knees in prayer, and the priests who accompanied him were doing the same. Austin looked for Virgil, but his eyes came upon the violet-headed diplomat first. He looked away as soon as he could, not wanting to let it be known he was staring, but the diplomat had already noticed him and began walking toward Austin with a graceful stride.
Come,
Virgil said, appearing in Austin's line of sight.
we must proceed to the chancel.
Austin's heart raced as he imagined the other diplomat's sensors blaring in alarm at the statically charged camera in Austin's hand. Virgil steered them toward the back wall of the quarry, the rock face having been recently cut open to add new tombs to the site. Virgil ducked inside one of the tomb entrances, vanishing into the darkness within. Following closely behind, Austin discovered Jesus' body on a small stone slab. The two men from the ladder were cleaning him, removing the dried blood from his wounds. He heard a sound and then noticed Mary off to the side of the tomb, her face streaked with tears.
The 14th station,
Father Ambrose said as the three of them walked by the scene, so close they could have reached out and touched the projections.
Jesus is placed in the tomb.
Yes, Father.
Virgil said, leading them deeper into the shadows.
Our faith is so strange. Our chief symbol is a man executed in the most brutal and humiliating way. But now we barely notice the cross. It's just a part of the scenery. These stations help remind us what the cross truly is.
Indeed, Father.
Virgil said, proceeding ever deeper into the dark tomb.
Lest we ever forget the true ugliness of sin.
Austin glanced behind him, searching for the glow of the giant diplomat, but all he saw was darkness. Perhaps the military techs had been wrong, and the diplomats couldn't detect the camera's static charge. Then, a thought occurred to him. Perhaps the Pilgrims hadn't detected the charge because he'd miscounted the cranks, discharging the camera in his pocket. If so, his mission had already failed. He shuddered, trying to repress the thought. As he walked on, the walls and ceiling became bright, the cramped grave yawning into a wide-open space, its walls now gold. A hum coursed through the air like an electric heartbeat, filling the place with energy that made Austin's skin tingle all over. For the first time since they'd arrived, he entertained the possibility that there might actually be a superweapon. Perhaps this energy was what the Chinese had detected. He looked around, trying to find a distinguishing feature, but the room was the same in all directions. Gold so encompassing he couldn't tell where the floor ended and the walls began. Up ahead, he noticed a splash of pink, the only spot of color in the otherwise monotone room. As they got closer, he realized it was a table sitting atop an altar 2 golden steps up from the floor. Separating the altar from the rest of the space was a waist-high railing. It looked like a molten metal waterfall, appearing in midair and then flowing down to disappear into the altar floor.
Behold the altar, where the sacrifice of the Mass may be presented.
It's like nothing I've ever seen.
Father Ambrose approached the railing.
How does the priest enter?
The altar rail moves aside automatically for a priest, deacon, or bishop, Father.
Father Ambrose rubbed his beard.
What about an ambo? I don't see one.
We did not anticipate you would need one, Father. The celebrants will be perfectly visible to all the congregants in the nave by means of the directed light beams, the same mechanism that allowed you to see the stories of the saints. And the celebrant will be able to access the missal in the same way, eliminating the need to carry a book.
Making sure Virgil and Father Ambrose were behind him, Austin walked up close to the altar rail. This was it. The end of the line. No spot to hide, no crowd of projections to camouflage himself with. He put his forefinger on the crank, about to make the final turn, when the giant diplomat glided up next to him, his approach completely unheard.
Ecce,
The large diplomat bellowed.
testimonium nostrum Christi qui resurrexit.
The Latin passed through Austin's skull untranslated as he braced himself for the attack, his comeuppance finally at hand. Instead, the gold wall behind the altar burst into a scene filled with color. Austin found himself looking at 3 men on crucifixes. It was the scene they had just walked through, except the point of view was elevated and further back in the crowd. Unlike in the transept, the people in the crowd were animated, moving about and shouting jeers. He watched again as the Roman soldier drove the spear into Jesus' side. The walls went dark for a few seconds, until they filled up again with the image of a rock with ropes around it, the Roman imperial seal affixed to the knot. The image had a greenish tint like an infrared camera recording in low light, and alien writing scrolled across the screen. With everyone distracted by the display, Austin realized this was his best chance to record the center of the church. He turned the crank one last time and opened his palm, aiming the lens at the altar, hoping the camera hadn't already been discharged. Then it dawned on him that he recognized the tomb. There was a flash of white light, and he was blinded. He held the camera steady as he covered his eyes with his other hand. In a few moments, his vision returned. The alien writing flashed red across the screen. The rock was gone, the ropes in a heap on the ground. 2 Roman soldiers approached the tomb. An instant later, they were running away, a man bathed in white light at the cave's center.
Virgil, is this what I think it is?
Father Ambrose's voice trembled.
Yes, Father. Behold, our witness to the risen Christ.
Austin tried to hold the camera steady, but his hand had begun to shake. Those were the words the giant diplomat had said, the words he'd been too overwhelmed to translate.
This isn't a recreation, is it? This is a recording.
Yes, Father.
How can this be?
The Pilgrims have been observing Earth for millennia. It is still the only other planet in the galaxy we have found with life.
As the image on the screen shifted, Austin held his breath. Jesus stood by a lake, surrounded by a crowd. Austin could see the wounds on his wrists. He pulled his robe aside to show a curious person the hole in his torso, and the crowd gasped and called his name. The image changed again. Jesus on a hilltop, his followers gathered around. Then he started floating in the air. The alien writing on the screen flashed red, scrolling across as if lit on fire. The image cut again to Earth from the vantage point of a satellite in orbit. A small ball of light came up from the planet, growing into an immense flame. It passed by the camera and disappeared into the emptiness of space. Austin gasped, his body hungry for the air he'd been too stunned to take in. He held the camera steady, uncertain if 60 seconds had passed. The image changed again, starting over, an instant replay. As the fire passed by the camera, it went frame by frame until the image froze. The camera then zoomed in. In the center of the fire was a man, the unmistakable face of Jesus.
Glory to God,
Father Ambrose exclaimed, his eyes wide.
You witnessed the ascension.
Yes, Father.
I don't know what to say.
Father Ambrose looked as though he might fall over.
You've been watching us all this time? Is that what UFOs are?
No, Father. Our surveillance has remained undetected, except for one incident in 1587.
Did this conflict with Pilgrim religion?
No, Father. Pilgrims are not like humans, prone to mythic and legendary beliefs. Our philosophers had long ago concluded that the universe had a creator, but we believed the creator did not care about his creation, devoting his entire divine being to contemplating himself, until we witnessed this. The evidence of divine intervention was incontrovertible. We knew then the creator cared for his creation, that he loved it. This meant the only reasonable course of action was to devote ourselves entirely to him.
Austin couldn't believe what he was hearing. He had his answer now about why the Pilgrims were Catholic, but the answer made him feel dizzy, like his entire conception of reality had been turned upside down. Then he noticed the violet-headed diplomat coming toward him. He closed his hand, concealing the camera in his fist.
When the data of what happened to Jesus finally reached the Pilgrim home system, a crewed mission was prepared with all due haste. But the preparation took time, and the distance of space is vast, the speed of light an immutable constraint. It took us many centuries to arrive.
How far did you travel?
The Pilgrim home system is over 100 light-years away.
At light speed?
No, Father. We could only proceed at a fraction thereof.
Good thing pilgrims live so long.
Yes, Father. Even though pilgrims live long, the journey has taken over 1,000 years, a sacrifice without equal in pilgrim history. But God's church is on earth, the only known place in the universe where one can be in the presence of the Creator in his substantial form. For that, we would travel any distance, endure any hardship, just to be close to him.
Father Ambrose met Austin's gaze, his face drained of color.
Austin, do you know what this means?
Austin shivered. The diplomats were closing in. Not knowing where to hide the camera, he shoved it back into his pocket.
This changes everything.